Chapter 224. Go to watch net. According to traditional Chinese medicine, the reason why people had blood clots and tumors was most likely because the qi was not smooth and the blood was not flowing well. If the blood was not flowing well, the meridians would be blocked, the qi and blood would accumulate, and the tumors would grow. These days, Li Yundong had been reading many ancient books, most of which were related to Buddhism and Taoism. Although many of the Taoist books were about the mysterious cultivation techniques, most of them were about the most basic knowledge of cultivation, traditional Chinese medicine. Therefore, Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he immediately thought of a way to help Zhou Qin stand up again. He straightened up and said softly to her, "Don't worry, I'll come to see you again. Go to watch net." 7 K.O.M. Although Li Yundong felt that he had a way to cure Zhou Qin, he was not sure and wanted to confirm it with Zi Yuan, so he didn't tell her. He walked to the door and said hello to Zhou Kachang. Just as he was about to go out, he suddenly heard Zhou Qin say coldly, "Don't come here again." Li Yundong was stunned at the door. He hadn't expected that the first thing Zhou Qin said would be this. He was stunned for a moment, but he quickly understood that this stubborn and proud girl obviously didn't want him to see her in such a sorry state at this time. Li Yundong smiled and didn't say anything. He went out by himself. Zhou Kachang watched Li Yundong leave. He sighed and handed the cup to Zhou Qin. "Qin, is it worth it?" Zhou Qin bit her lips and remained silent. Her fingers that were holding the cup were trembling and turning white. Li Yundong returned home. As soon as he entered the door, he shouted, "Zi Yuan, Zi Yuan." But he turned around in the room, but he couldn't see Zi Yuan. Li Yundong rushed to the balcony and shouted at the balcony of Ruan Hongling's house, "Zi Yuan." He shouted twice, but there was no response from the other side of the house. Just as he was about to fly over, he heard the sound of the door lock. He turned his head and saw Zi Yuan wearing a casual white sportswear. She was carrying bags of vegetables in her hand, and there was a fish jumping in one of the plastic bags. Go to watch net. 7 K.O.M. Although Li Yundong was in a bad mood, he couldn't help laughing when he saw her like this. "You look like a housewife." Zi Yuan rolled her eyes at Li Yundong, which was a rare sight. Obviously, what Li Yundong said last night still made her feel uncomfortable. Li Yundong saw that she was ignoring him and walked to the kitchen alone. He coughed dryly and stopped joking. "By the way, I want to ask you something." Zi Yuan was skillfully busy in the kitchen. She said casually, "Go ahead." As she spoke, she did not turn around and was still busy in the kitchen. Li Yundong looked at her busy figure at the door and suddenly felt strange in his heart. Zi Yuan was like the hostess of the house, and he was like a guest. He told Zi Yuan about Zhou Qin's situation, and then told her his own thoughts and opinions. Finally, he said, "Do you think my method will work? Will she recover if we clear the blood clots and tumors in her spine?" Zi Yuan was washing vegetables with her back to Li Yundong. After hearing this, she stopped, turned around, and thought for a moment. Then she said, "In theory, it's feasible. However, even if you can cure her, what can you do?" Li Yundong was stunned. "What do you mean?" The expression on Zi Yuan's face was indifferent. She wiped her hands on the apron in front of her and asked, "Even if she can stand up again, what can she do?" She had lost all of her past, lost everything. Could she go back to her previous life? And Zi Yuan gave Li Yundong a meaningful look. "And, can you give her what she really wants?" Li Yundong's whole body shook, and he fell into deep thought. It was not that Li Yundong didn't know that Zhou Qin liked him, but he really didn't expect that Zhou Qin would pay so much for him. This kind of sacrifice was so deep that he could hardly repay it. Zi Yuan sighed slightly, and her tone seemed to have seen through the affairs of the world. She said lightly, "You can cure her external injuries, but you can't cure her internal injuries. Go to the internet. Don't tell me you're going to repay me with your body." Li Yundong immediately said firmly, when I went to the hospital to see Zhao Yujian last time, I heard Ding Nan say something outside the ward. She said, "Love is not charity. You don't have to love whoever is pitiful. I love Su Chan, and she also loves me. This has not changed, and it will not change in the future." Zi Yuan took a deep look at Li Yundong and sighed. "My master once told me that the world of mortals is bitter, but the most bitter is love. He said that cultivators must not indulge in worldly love, otherwise it will be difficult for them to have great cultivation and achievements in the future." Li Yundong's face was full of seriousness. He retorted, "I don't think so. I am a novice cultivator, but in my opinion, I think the reason why you cultivators cultivate is purely for the sake of cultivation. You have never thought about why I should cultivate. Your master said that the world of mortals is bitter, but the most bitter is love. Do you believe him? Have you ever tasted love? You haven't even tasted love. How can you say that love is bitter?" Zi Yuan was stunned. She subconsciously asked, "I saw that when you and Su Chan parted, the two of you were sad and gloomy. Tears fell like rain. Even as an outsider, I can feel the pain in your heart. If this isn't bitterness, then what is?" When Li Yundong heard her mention Su Chan, he couldn't help but show a hint of softness in his eyes. He said, "In life, there is nothing perfect. You only see the separation of life and death, so you think that life is bitter. You only see the reunion and separation of love, so you think that the most bitter is love. But, have you ever seen the sweetness and happiness between two people when they are together? Have you ever seen the joy of their love being satisfied in an instant when they meet again?" The more Li Yundong spoke, the softer his voice became. His eyes were lost in thought, as if he had leaped to the near future, to the days after he brought Su Chan back. He said, "Why should I cultivate? Because I know that if I don't cultivate, I won't be able to protect myself, let alone my girl. Once something happens, we will have to face the scene of reunion and separation again. I don't want to see such a scene again, so I want to cultivate." Li Yundong said, "You can think that I have no future, or that I don't want to make progress, but I am like this. I want to be a cultivator who only envies lovers, not immortals. All the motivation for my cultivation now is to make myself stronger as soon as possible, get through the heavenly tribulation, and then be with my girl. I will take good care of her and make sure that she doesn't get hurt again." Zi Yuan was stunned by Li Yundong's words. She felt that something deeply rooted in her heart had been shaken by Li Yundong. She couldn't help murmuring, "Master has been telling me this since I was a child. Is he wrong? Impossible, how could Master be wrong? He has never been wrong." Li Yundong saw that Zi Yuan, who had always been wise and calm, was at a loss at this time. He couldn't help saying, "Is your master always right? If he is right in everything, why did he marry Ao Wushuang back then?" Zi Yuan's body shook, and her eyes widened, unable to speak. Li Yundong suddenly looked at Zi Yuan sympathetically and said, "You said it yourself. If you don't experience the world, how can you know what it feels like? Looking at you like this, let me ask you boldly, have you ever been in love? Do you know what it feels like to be in love between two people? Can you understand the feeling of being willing to give up everything for the other party?" Zi Yuan was stunned by Li Yundong's question. She was stunned, and her mind was in a mess. She subconsciously asked, "Didn't Zhou Qin give up everything for you? How will you repay her?" There was a deep and thoughtful look in Li Yundong's eyes. He sighed softly and said, "She ruined herself and her life for me. So, I have to give it all back to her. I caused her to be unable to stand up, so I must make her stand up again. I caused her to lose her life of luxury, so I must give her another life that can be compared to it." Zi Yuan came to her senses. She realized something and asked tentatively, "Are you going to teach her cultivation?" Li Yundong nodded heavily. "Yes." Zi Yuan took a deep breath and said slowly, "Since you've made your decision, I won't say anything more." As she spoke, she turned around and continued to wash vegetables, but her movements were slow and stiff. She seemed to be very inattentive, as if she was thinking about something. Li Yundong stood at the door for a while. He thought of a few professional medical questions and asked, "How can the blood tumor in the spine dissipate?" Ziyuan didn't look back, nor did she stop what she was doing. She said casually, "Ordinary people need to use gold or silver needles, and those with weaker skills need to use bone needles. The qi in your body is too strong, so you just need to massage the surrounding acupoints." Li Yundong smiled. "Actually, I think so too, but I can't make up my mind, so I don't dare to act rashly." Ziyuan said lightly, "Then go and do it." Li Yundong replied in a deep voice, "I'll go tomorrow." Li Yundong was about to turn around and leave when Ziyuan suddenly stopped. She turned around and said with a confused face, "Li Yundong, what does love taste like? Why do so many people say it's bitter, but why do so many people taste it? Even my master is no exception." Li Yundong smiled slightly. "Why don't you go and taste it yourself? Others tell you 1,000 times, but it's not as good as experiencing it once." After that, he turned and walked out of the kitchen. Ziyuan stood there in a daze. Her eyes were blurred, and she sighed softly in her heart. There seemed to be a myriad of emotions between her brows, but in the end, it turned into a faint confusion. /om/ Chapter 225. Go to watch net. The next day, Li Yundong skipped his morning classes and headed straight for the People's Hospital after buying some fruits. Watch net. 7 K.O. Just as he was about to reach the hospital, he noticed someone selling pets on the side of the road. He couldn't help but stop to take a look. After thinking for a while, he took out some money and bought a pair of hamsters. Then, carrying the cage, he rushed to the hospital. As soon as he walked into the building, he saw a strong nurse yelling at him, "Hey, you're not allowed to bring pets in." Hey, I'm talking to you, what's wrong with you?" Li Yundong paused, then pointed at himself. "Me?" The nurse said rudely, "Nonsense, who else could it be? What is this place? Can I bring pets in?" Li Yundong feigned a troubled expression. "Then where should I put it?" The nurse turned her head, pointed to a place, and said, "Put it there." But when she turned her head again, Li Yundong was nowhere to be seen. After avoiding the nurse, Li Yundong no longer entered the ward casually. He carefully hid the cage behind him. When he arrived at Zhou Qin's ward, he saw that she was lying on the bed, drinking the porridge that had been cooked. Beside her, Zhou Kachang was looking at her lovingly and sadly. As soon as Li Yundong entered the door, Zhou Qin's gaze followed him. In an instant, a burst of joy burst out in her eyes, but it was quickly hidden. Instead, it was replaced by a coldness that could freeze people's bones. Seeing him, Zhou Kachang coughed dryly and said to Zhou Qin, "I have something to do. You guys talk first." He entered the room and put away the cage in his hand and the fan of 7 treasures on his back. Then, he greeted Zhou Qin with a smile. However, Zhou Qin did not appreciate it. She said coldly, "Didn't I tell you not to come again?" Li Yundong smiled. "You're my friend. How could I not come?" "Friends?" Zhou Qin sneered. She suddenly laughed at herself and said, "Do I still have friends?" "Ha ha ha." Li Yundong looked at her with a gentle expression. He picked up the knife beside the table and an apple. Without asking if she wanted it, he began to peel it himself. As he peeled, he asked, "How can there be no fruit? Am I not?" Zhou Qin sneered and said, "You have to think carefully before you speak. I'm like a plague now. Everyone avoids me." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Everyone in the world can avoid you, but I can't. You're like this because of me. If I hide from you, then what's the difference between me and a beast like young Master He?" Zhou Qin was stunned. The coldness in her eyes softened a little, but it soon became cold again. She said in a cold voice, "That's none of your business. This is my own choice." "It's none of your business." Are you here to laugh at me, to laugh at me? Li Yundong knew that Zhou Qin was a proud princess who was usually high and mighty. At this time, she was suddenly knocked into the dust, so she must not be able to come to terms with it. He smiled and said, "Don't talk so much. Come on, have an apple. Watch net." Seeing that he didn't answer her at all, she couldn't help but say angrily, "I don't want to eat apples." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then what do you want to eat?" When Zhou Qin saw Li Yundong's faint smile, she didn't know why, but she felt as if there were sharp needles piercing her heart. She wanted to curse like a shrew, say the worst words, and use the most destructive and humiliating words to drive the boy in front of her away. But when the words were on the tip of her tongue, Zhou Qin couldn't say them no matter what. Deep in her heart, a voice echoed faintly, "If I really drive him away and he never comes back, what should I do?" Zhou Qin gritted her teeth, pointed to the fruit basket next to her, and said, "I want to eat bananas." Li Yundong quickly took a banana for her and peeled the skin off, but Zhou Qin took the banana and threw it on the ground without looking at it. "I want to eat pears." Li Yundong was stunned, but he quickly reacted. This girl can't turn around and is throwing a tantrum. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Okay, okay." Then, he went to get a pear. Zhou Qin said, "I don't eat it with the skin on." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Okay, I'll peel it for you." He finished peeling the pear and handed it to Zhou Qin. Zhou Qin grabbed it and threw it on the ground again. "I want to eat bananas." Li Yundong looked at the peeled pear on the ground. His expression was indifferent, and he didn't move. Seeing that he didn't move, Zhou Qin thought that he was angry, so she sneered and said, "What, you can't stand it? If you can't stand it, then leave. I don't want to see you." At this time, Li Yundong turned his face and smiled at her. He didn't say anything, but still took another banana, peeled it, and handed it over. Go to the internet. 7KOM. Seeing him like this, for some reason, Zhou Qin became even angrier. She grabbed it and threw it to the ground. Then, she looked at Li Yundong angrily. "I want to eat pineapples." Li Yundong smiled and turned to get the pineapple. After peeling it, he handed it to Zhou Qin. As expected, Zhou Qin took the pineapple and threw it outside. At the same time, she shouted, "I want to eat bananas." The pineapple was thrown outside with a bang, and the patients and nurses in the corridor were so scared that they shouted, "Hey, what the hell is going on inside? Don't throw the fruit around." Zhou Qin roared, "What are you shouting for? I want to throw my fruit. What's it to you?" In this day and age, the fierce were afraid of the stupid, and the stupid were afraid of the desperate. As soon as Zhou Qin shouted, the outside suddenly fell silent. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Well, what a scary roar." Zhou Qin sneered and said, "Yes, I am a shrew who roars like a lion. Is this the first day you've met me?" Li Yundong responded with a and nodded. Then, he turned around again. He glanced at the fruit, then turned back and said with a grievance, "The bananas are gone." At first, when Zhou Qin saw that Li Yundong had actually nodded, she suddenly became angry. But soon, when she saw his aggrieved expression and said that the bananas were gone, she couldn't help but want to laugh. But she quickly held it back and said with a cold face, "Then I want to eat peaches." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How can there be peaches in this season? Zhou Qin said with a straight face, "I don't care. I want to eat peaches." Li Yundong sighed and took an apple from the fruit basket. Then, he sat on the edge of the bed with his legs crossed, peeling it and humming a tune. Zhou Qin saw that he was holding an apple and was peeling it hard. She couldn't help but say angrily, "I said I want to eat peaches." Li Yundong nodded, but he still didn't move. He continued to hum a tune and peel the apple. Zhou Qin was so angry that her eyebrows raised. "Are you deaf? I want to eat peaches." Li Yundong slowly peeled the apple, then threw the skin into the trash can and took a bite. He looked at Zhou Qin with a strange expression and said, "Did I say that I was peeling this for you?" Zhou Qin was stunned. She subconsciously wanted to laugh, but as soon as the corners of her mouth curled up, she held it back. She glared at him and was about to lose her temper when she suddenly heard a shout from outside. "Well, I was wondering which guy came here to make trouble. It turns out to be you." Li Yundong turned his head and saw the strong nurse downstairs standing at the door with her hands on her hips and sleeves rolled up. She was about to rush in aggressively. Li Yundong stood up and quickly waved his hands. "Don't come in." The fat nurse sneered. As she spoke, she rushed into the room. "Do you think I won't come in just because you told me not to? You." Before she could finish her words, she suddenly stepped on the banana that Zhou Qin had thrown on the ground. With a sizzling sound, she fell to the ground on her back like a mountain of gold and jade. The shoes under her feet flew up and hit her heavily in the face. At this time, Li Yundong said with a look of grievance and sympathy, "I told you not to come in." Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing anymore. As soon as she laughed twice, she saw Li Yundong looking at her. Zhou Qin's face suddenly became serious, but not long after, she saw the fat nurse twisting her body to get up from the ground while cursing. Her funny appearance immediately made Zhou Qin burst into laughter again. Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. She didn't want Li Yundong to see her laugh, so she pulled out the pillow behind her and covered her face with it. Her whole body trembled with laughter. The fat nurse got up from the ground, pointed at Li Yundong, and shouted furiously, "You bastard, did you deliberately throw this banana on the ground?" Li Yundong smiled apologetically and said, "Don't jump, don't jump. Be careful not to fall again." The fat nurse had fallen a little hard just now. She looked at her feet with lingering fear. Her appearance suddenly made Zhou Qin, who had finally stopped laughing. She lifted the pillow and burst into laughter again. The fat nurse laughed so hard that she couldn't pull her face down, but she couldn't directly lose her temper at the patient. The door was full of people pointing at the inside, covering their mouths and snickering. She was so angry that for a moment, she forgot to ask Li Yundong to bring in a pet. She thought to herself, "Damn it, those B*****s want me to deal with this damn thing. They really don't have good intentions. I don't care anymore." Thinking of this, she stomped her feet and angrily said, "Just you wait and see." After saying that, she rolled away like a mountain of flesh. Seeing her go out, Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He used the broom in the room to sweep the fruit that had been thrown on the ground and then dumped it into the trash can. After Zhou Qin stopped laughing, she kept covering her face with a pillow, leaving only a pair of eyes exposed. She watched Li Yundong busy in the room, and for a moment, she couldn't help but look at him more and more softly. When Li Yundong was done, he looked at her. Zhou Qin immediately avoided his eyes in panic, but soon found that something was wrong and stared back at him fiercely. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Why are you staring at me? What other fruit do you want to eat?" Zhou Qin said bitterly, "I want to eat peaches." Li Yundong said, "Oh," then turned around and took out an apple from the fruit basket, slowly peeling it. When Zhou Qin saw this, she suddenly became angry. She said bitterly, "Why do you only care about eating? Who is injured here?" Li Yundong just nodded and didn't say anything. He still slowly crossed his legs, peeled the apple, and hummed a little tune. Seeing him like this, Zhou Qin was so angry that she threw the pillow in her arms at his face, and her face turned white with anger. After Li Yundong peeled the apple, he pulled the apple skin as if he was asking for credit and said with a smile, "Dang, dang. The fresh apple is peeled." Zhou Qin sneered, closed her eyes, and thought to herself, "It must be for yourself again. Are you trying to fool me again?" But not long after she closed her eyes, she suddenly felt something cold and wet touch the corner of her mouth. Zhou Qin opened her eyes and saw Li Yundong smiling at her. He said softly, "There are no peaches now, only a peeled apple. You can make do with it. I'll buy you one next year, okay?" In Zhou Qin's impression, Li Yundong had never spoken to her like this. This boy was polite to her, but it was only out of courtesy and etiquette. When had he ever spoken to her so gently? Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong blankly, a little dazed for a moment. Seeing that she didn't respond, Li Yundong said, "You don't want it? If you don't want it, I'll throw it away." But Zhou Qin suddenly reacted, grabbed it, and took a fierce bite, as if to vent her hatred. This bite was so big that she bit her tongue. The sweetness of the apple was mixed with the saltiness of blood. Zhou Qin couldn't help but think to herself, is this the taste of love? I've done so much for him, and now I can finally get him to peel an apple for me? Thinking of this, Zhou Qin couldn't help but burst into tears. As she cried, she bit the apple and said vaguely, "Li Yundong, you're so annoying, you're so annoying, /om/." Chapter 226. Go to Watch Network. This was the first time that Li Yundong had seen Zhou Qin cry in front of him. In the past, he couldn't imagine what this high and mighty, strong and proud girl looked like when she was crying. But at this time, the girl's tears fell like pearls from a broken necklace. Li Yundong was already feeling guilty, and at this time, he couldn't help but feel sad. He reached out and gently stroked Zhou Qin's soft long hair, saying softly, "It will be fine. Everything will be fine. Cheer up." No matter how strong and mature a girl pretended to be, they would always have a weak and fragile side. Especially when they were facing the person they liked, this kind of weakness and fragility would be more easily revealed. The same was true for Zhou Qin. Hearing Li Yundong's surprisingly gentle comfort, Zhou Qin could no longer keep a straight face to him. She held the apple in both hands and nodded with tears falling like rain. Li Yundong smiled and reached out to wipe the tears on her face. As soon as his hand touched Zhou Qin's skin, she couldn't help but tremble. It was as if Li Yundong's hand had electricity. A short touch made her whole body numb and her heart agitated. Zhou Qin's body trembled and her face subconsciously shrank, but as soon as she shrank, she regretted it in her heart. However, she couldn't save face and was too embarrassed to move closer. Zhou Qin saw that Li Yundong's hand was frozen in place and did not continue to reach out. She suddenly felt bitter in her heart. "Can't you go further?" Li Yundong withdrew his frozen hand in the air and smiled embarrassedly. "Don't cry. You're such a beautiful girl. It's not good for you to cry too much and become ugly." Zhou Qin wiped away her tears and said angrily, "It's none of your business." Li Yundong smiled and said, Yes, I don't care. I can't control you." Zhou Qin snorted and wiped away her tears. Her face became cold again, but her voice was obviously warm. "What are you doing here? Didn't I tell you not to come?" Li Yundong sighed with a smile. "I already know what happened. How can I not come?" Zhou Qin smiled bitterly. "What can you solve if you come? Can I stand up again? Can I go back to my old life?" Li Yundong said, "I don't know if I can go back to my previous life, but I can help you stand up again." How could Zhou Qin believe his words? The expression on her face slowly became indifferent again. She sighed and said, "It's useless. My attending doctor has already said that I will never be able to stand up again in this life." Watch net. Color ** literature _learning% super #speed. Update. He was silent for a while. He just picked up the pet cage he had bought downstairs and placed it in front of Zhou Qin. He smiled and said, "Don't think too much. You used to be very optimistic. Why have you become pessimistic now? There is nothing impossible in this world. It all depends on whether you are willing to do it or not." Then, he pointed at the little hamster that was running on wheels in the cage. He smiled and said, "Look, even it knows to exercise to protect itself. How can you give up?" Li Yundong's words warmed Zhou Qin's heart, but she still couldn't help retorting, "They have been running on wheels like this all their lives. Can they run a meter away? They will always be in the same place, and they will never be able to escape from this cage. Li Yundong fixed his eyes on Zhou Qin and said softly, "No, Zhou Qin, they don't have the strength to break free from the shackles of this cage, but haven't you already jumped out of the previous cage?" Thinking of this, Zhou Qin couldn't help but feel an inexplicable pain in her heart. It took a lot of courage and a moment of impulse to take this step, but if she fell to her death, it would be over. But now she woke up and found that she had nothing. How could she face the future? How could she face the future? Yes, she was indeed free, but the price of this freedom was too high. Zhou Qin suddenly thought of Neo in The Matrix. He used to live in a world controlled by robots. Although he was ignorant and had no freedom at all, he lived a happy life. But when he suddenly broke free from this world, he suddenly found that the real world of freedom was so cold and cruel. Was it all worth it? Zhou Qin sat there blankly, motionless and silent. After a long time, she said slowly, "So what if I jumped out?" Li Yundong knew that although Zhou Qin's mood was much better than before, she still couldn't get over it. He didn't force her. He just smiled and said, "It will be fine. With me here, you will get better." When Zhou Qin heard this, her whole body trembled. She couldn't help but look at Li Yundong with infatuation and softness in her eyes. No matter what, he has treated me much better after all. What I have done is not in vain. Go to the internet. Although Zhou Qin didn't believe it in her heart, she still smiled slightly. Her smile was sweet and beautiful. Li Yundong wanted to make Zhou Qin happy, so he kept talking and laughing with her. He picked up some jokes and interesting things to tell her, which made her giggle all the time. Zhou Kachang, who was about to come in at the door, took a look and stopped, then turned to leave. He sighed in his heart, sure enough, girls are extroverted. It's useless to say 10,000 words. When her lover comes, she immediately smiles. When a girl grows up, she can't be kept at home. It's a pity, it's too late. Zhou Kachang sighed with emotion. He slowly walked downstairs and sat down on a stool by the roadside, his eyes fixed on her. After a long time, a person suddenly sat down next to Zhou Kachang. Zhou Kachang didn't turn his face, but said in a deep voice, "Sorry, can you leave me alone for a while?" "What's wrong, old Zhou? Are you turning your back on me so soon?" A magnetic baritone sounded from the side. Zhou Kachang turned his head and saw a middle-aged man with a square face smiling at him. Zhou Kachang was shocked. "Old Li? Why are you here?" Old Li chuckled, took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, and handed it over. "I came to see you, an old friend. Do you want one?" Zhou Kachang reached out to take the cigarette, but his hand stopped in midair. He smiled and said, "Forget it, I won't smoke anymore. I quit smoking." Old Li looked at him strangely. "When did you quit?" Zhou Kachang smiled. "Just now." After Old Li lit the cigarette, he took a puff and slowly exhaled a ring of smoke. He sighed slightly and said, "Old Zhou, I know you have resentment in your heart, but don't think too much about it. You have to look at the big picture, right?" Zhou Kachang smiled bitterly. "I've already gotten over it. There's nothing wrong with retiring like this. In the past, I was too obsessed with being an official. I didn't handle my relationship with the He family well, nor did I handle my relationship with my daughter well. This is my fate. I accept it." Old Li snorted and said, "The He family has gone too far this time. The He family has no descendants, but young master He brought this upon himself. Do you want the Zhou family to have no descendants as well?" Zhou Kachang smiled and said, "Old Li, it's all thanks to your help this time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable." Old Li laughed and said, "What are you talking about? The eyes of the masses are clear. No matter what, Zhou Qin has put herself in danger, and you have also put yourself in danger. What else do they want? If the He family wants to be naughty again, I'll be the first to object. Zhou Kachang smiled with emotion and said, "This is what it means to see a friend in need." Old Li snorted and said, "What trouble? You won't even give me a cigarette." Zhou Kachang laughed and said, "I won't smoke anymore. How about we play a game of chess?" Old Li slapped his thigh and said, "Okay, that's what I like. As the saying goes, life is like chess, and chess is like life. Old Zhou, let's have a good talk today and experience life in chess. You know, winning and losing in life are common sense. Although you have lost a lot in front of you, it doesn't mean that you can't make a comeback." The two middle-aged men from the system found a stone platform under the inpatient building and began to play. In the ward, Li Yundong brought hot food and placed it in front of Zhou Qin. Zhou Qin looked at the dishes in front of her and suddenly said childishly, "These dishes are not delicious." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then what do you want to eat? I'll buy it for you." Zhou Qin rolled her eyes. She wanted to make things difficult for Li Yundong, so she said, "I want to eat the food you cook." As expected, Li Yundong showed a look of embarrassment. He hesitated for a moment and asked, "Are you hungry now?" Zhou Qin pushed the lunchbox in front of her and said, "No, I want to eat the food you cook." Li Yundong thought for a moment and nodded. "Then wait for me for a while." As he said this, he carried the fan of 7 treasures on his back and walked out. Seeing that he was really leaving, Zhou Qin reached out and called out, but she didn't have time to stop him. She couldn't help but think, is he really going? I was just saying it casually. Will he be angry if I order him around like this? Zhou Qin's heart was filled with gains and losses. She felt that time was passing like a year. In just an hour, she felt as if she had waited for a century. It wasn't until Li Yundong's figure appeared in the room again that her heart returned to her chest. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Li Yundong said with a smile. He took out a few sealed lunch boxes from the plastic bag he was carrying and put them in front of Zhou Qin. "In a hurry, I didn't have time to cook anything delicious. I only made a few home-cooked dishes. Do you want to eat them first? I'll cook something delicious for you another day." Zhou Qin opened the lunchbox and saw that there were steamed ribs, stir-fried lotus root slices, and stir-fried meat with radish inside. They were all ordinary dishes. According to Zhou Qin's life of luxury in the past, these were all things that were not pleasing to her eyes. However, Zhou Qin felt that the dishes in front of her were the best delicacies in the world, even though she hadn't tasted them yet. Zhou Qin couldn't wait to pick up the chopsticks and move her body reluctantly, wanting to have a taste. Seeing that it was inconvenient for her to move, Li Yundong leaned over and helped her sit up. Zhou Qin smiled at Li Yundong, picked up a piece of ribs, and put it into her mouth. She slowly and carefully tasted it. As she ate, her eyes suddenly turned red again. Li Yundong said exaggeratedly, "No way. Is my cooking so bad? Is it so bad that you want to cry?" Zhou Qin burst into laughter and spat the food on the bed sheet. She glared at Li Yundong with red eyes and said, "You're so annoying. You've dirted my sheets." Li Yundong said with an aggrieved expression, "You sprayed it." Zhou Qin said angrily, "It's all your fault." This sentence had a double meaning. Zhou Qin's words were unintentional, but Li Yundong was listening attentively. He sighed and said, "Yes, it's all my fault. Blame it on me." However, Zhou Qin didn't react. She felt like she had fallen in love for the first time. It was as if bickering with Li Yundong was the happiest thing in the world. At this time, she was winning, and she was even more delighted in her heart. She said angrily, "If I don't blame you, who should I blame? Humph, it's all your fault." These words made Li Yundong's heart tremble. He suddenly thought of Su Chan. The little girl had once nestled in his arms with a sweet smile, raised her head, and said coquettishly, "It's all your fault." Li Yundong's mood of joking with Zhou Qin gradually dissipated. He silently waited for Zhou Qin to finish eating, then asked, "Zhou Qin, shall I give you a massage, /om/?" Chapter 227. Go to Watch Network. Hearing that Li Yundong was going to give her a massage, Zhou Qin was obviously stunned. Although she didn't know why Li Yundong was doing this, she nodded gently out of love and trust for Li Yundong. 7 K.O.M. Zhou Qin's neck was slightly red. She asked softly, "Do I have to lie on my stomach?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "No, as long as you can sit on the chair." Zhou Qin forced a smile and said, "Then you have to help me. I can't do it alone." Li Yundong understood. He came to the bedside and held Zhou Qin's legs with one hand. One hand passed under her ribs and gently picked her up. Although Zhou Qin knew that Li Yundong was not really hugging her, she still felt a strong masculine smell blowing over her face, making her suddenly tremble slightly. Her hands involuntarily wrapped around Li Yundong's neck. Li Yundong's whole body tensed up. He didn't even dare to look at Zhou Qin's eyes. He just stiffly carried her to the wheelchair with a straight face. Then, he let out a long sigh of relief in his heart and quickly let go of her. Zhou Qin suddenly sat in the cold wheelchair from the warm embrace. The gap in her heart made her feel lost for a moment. Li Yundong pushed Zhou Qin to the corridor outside the ward so that she could breathe smoothly. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Close your eyes. I'll give you a massage." Zhou Qin closed her eyes. She didn't know why Li Yundong suddenly wanted to give her a massage. She couldn't help feeling a little nervous, but in her nervousness, she was faintly looking forward to something. Li Yundong stretched out the palm of one hand and pressed it on the top of Zhou Qin's head. With a little qi, he transferred his vigorous and condensed Jindan's qi into Zhou Qin's body. Zhou Qin only felt that the top of her head was suddenly hot, and then there seemed to be a stream of hot air in her body, slowly rising and constantly rushing toward the top of her head. Then, when the hot air in her body touched the hot air on the top of her head, Zhou Qin's body trembled violently. She felt as if there were countless mice in her body, constantly swimming in her blood vessels and meridians, making her feel itchy, hot, numb, and limp. If it had been anyone else, they would have been twisting their bodies at this time, screaming and laughing, unable to control themselves at all. However, Zhou Qin's willpower was extremely strong, and she managed to endure it. From the outside, Li Yunyang could only see a layer of fine sweat on her neck. Other than that, there was nothing unusual. He had massaged Su Chan and Chao Kefi before, so he naturally knew what it felt like when the Yuanyang qi entered the body. Although everyone's physique might have different reactions, it was absolutely not to the point where there was no reaction at all. Watch net. Hongjiom, how is this possible? Li Yundong pondered for a while. He felt that maybe he hadn't injected enough Yuanyang qi. So Li Yundong accelerated the input of Yuanyang qi. In an instant, Zhou Qin felt as if someone had poured a basin of boiling water on top of her head, and the qi and blood in her body were surging like countless wild horses galloping wildly. An extremely vigorous and condensed heat flowed from the top of her head down her spine, penetrating step by step, like boiling mercury, pervasive. After this boiling heat encountered the extravasated blood and tumor between her spine, it paused for a moment. Then, Zhou Qin clearly felt that all the qi and blood in her body were revolving at a high speed around the tumor and extravasated blood. In the process of this high-speed rotation, at first, Zhou Qin only felt that the tumor and extravasated blood were a little swollen. Then, the heat began to burn until her waist began to slowly feel the heat. Gradually, Zhou Qin felt that the lower part of her waist began to slowly swell. This was no small matter. Zhou Qin suddenly understood, Li Yundong was helping her treat her injury. Does he also know medical skills? All the incredible things that she had witnessed happening to Li Yundong with her own eyes suddenly flashed through Zhou Qin's mind. She knew that Li Yundong was definitely not an ordinary person. What ordinary doctors could not do, he could do. Zhou Qin's originally dead heart suddenly blazed. It turned out that he was not comforting me. He really could cure my injury. She suddenly became wild with excitement. What could be more exciting than being able to let her stand up again? In this excitement, her feet suddenly moved. Although this movement was light, Zhou Qin was keenly aware of it. Zhou Qin almost cried with joy. Zhou Qin was so excited that she put her hands on the ground, subconsciously wanting to see if she could stand up on her own. But just as she was about to move, she heard Li Yundong's deep voice behind her. "Don't move. Take a deep breath and calm your breath." This sound was like a morning bell and evening drum, knocking heavily on Zhou Qin's heart. Zhou Qin's body suddenly tightened, and then slowly relaxed. Her hands on both sides of the wheelchair also slowly loosened. A frightening thought flashed through her mind. If I recover, will he stop talking to me and care about me? The reason why he is so obedient and gentle to me, is it because he sympathizes with me and pitied me? If that's the case. Zhou Qin's hand tightly gripped the armrest, and her fingers turned white. If that's the case, then I'd rather sit in a wheelchair like this for the rest of my life and let him take care of me and let him owe me. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Thinking of this, Zhou Qin showed a sweet and sad smile. Her hand involuntarily touched her thigh and grabbed it hard. Zhou Qin faintly felt a trace of pain from this grab. She knew that her leg had begun to get better. The magic of traditional Chinese medicine was that it often had an excellent effect on some difficult and complicated diseases that Western medicine couldn't do anything about. If ordinary traditional Chinese medicine wanted to evacuate the tumors and extravasated blood in Zhou Qin's wound, they had to use acupuncture to stimulate her due meridian and the acupoints around the wound, thereby accelerating the flow of qi in the meridians and allowing the qi and blood to naturally take away the extravasated blood. However, Li Yundong had used his powerful aura to disperse the extravasated blood and tumors in Zhou Qin's body. Although this couldn't be done in one go, the method was right, and the effect was surprisingly fast. After Li Yundong transferred yuanqi for as long as an hour, he began to stop. After a while, he raised his hand, squatted in front of Zhou Qin, and asked, "How do you feel just now?" Zhou Qin opened her eyes and said with a smile, "I feel so hot all over." Li Yundong glanced at her and said, "Then hurry up and go into the room. It's windy outside. Don't let the wind blow into your body through your pores. That will become moisture, which will aggravate the condition." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Okay." Li Yundong pushed Zhou Qin into the ward, then picked her up and prepared to put her on the bed. However, as soon as Li Yundong's hand touched Zhou Qin, he found that her clothes were already soaked, and even the hair on her neck was wet. Li Yundong frowned and picked up a towel by the bedside. "Can this towel be used to wipe sweat?" Zhou Qin nodded and stared at the towel in Li Yundong's hand. Suddenly, she looked a little shy, but also a little expectant. Li Yundong didn't react for a moment. He just wanted to help Zhou Qin wipe the sweat off her body. Just now, he had used his powerful yuanyang qi to help Zhou Qin open up many acupoints and meridians in her body. At this time, Zhou Qin's pores were wide open. If the sweat was not wiped clean in time, when the sweat evaporated automatically, some of the water vapor would drill into the human body through the pores and finally enter the meridians, forming moisture. In traditional Chinese medicine, this was called dampness invading the body. Many people didn't pay attention to it when they were young. When it rained, they got wet, or when they sweated profusely after exercise and didn't have time to dry themselves. Then the moisture would enter the body, and when there was a problem with the bones, the moisture would flow along the qi and blood, causing rheumatism. Li Yundong was a cultivator, so he could get rid of the moisture through qi, but Zhou Qin was not. If there was moisture in her body at this time, and Li Yundong helped her get rid of it in the future, it would take several times more effort. Because the moisture could be transferred, it was like a thief that got into the human body. It would run around everywhere, going wherever there was a gap. If Li Yundong wanted to get rid of the moisture, he would have to spend several times more effort to find it first, and then he would have to spend several times more effort to get rid of the moisture. At this time, Li Yundong had subconsciously regarded himself as a doctor. As the saying goes, doctors have no taboo. Li Yundong didn't think too much about it. He picked up the towel and began to help Zhou Qin wipe the sweat on her back. At first, Li Yundong wiped the sweat on Zhou Qin's neck, and then he naturally extended the towel to her back to wipe it. There were many acupuncture points on the back of a person, so when they sweated, the back was often the first to sweat, and the sweat was also the most. Zhou Qin was wearing the hospital's uniform. The clothes were loose, so Li Yundong reached in and put his hand in. Zhou Qin let out a soft cry, and her body trembled slightly, but she quickly held back. Her delicate jade-like skin felt Li Yundong's gentle wiping. After he finished wiping the sweat on Zhou Qin's back, he wanted to help her wipe other places, but when he looked at Zhou Qin and was about to speak, he saw that Zhou Qin's face was flushed and her eyes were fixed on him. Her eyes were full of amorous emotions, and her sinuses were constantly moving. In particular, Zhou Qin's snow-white chest was exposed, and there was an attractive ravine in it that made his blood boil. Li Yundong's heart suddenly trembled. He knew that he had been too engrossed for a moment and had lost his composure. Li Yundong coughed dryly, handed the towel to Zhou Qin, and said awkwardly, "You can wipe your chest yourself." Zhou Qin's face turned red. She took the towel in a daze, but after a while, she suddenly came to her senses and buried her head in the pillow, not daring to look up at Li Yundong. Li Yundong saw that she was so shy that her neck was red, and her ears were so red that they seemed to be dripping blood. He felt more and more embarrassed and coughed dryly. "You have to wipe the sweat away quickly, or it's not good for your health." Zhou Qin was like an ostrich. She suddenly pulled up the quilt and covered herself with it, then said in a trembling voice, "Turn around." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You're covering yourself so tightly. Do you think I have X-ray vision?" With a swish, Zhou Qin threw a pillow from under the quilt at Li Yundong. She said in a trembling voice, "Turn around." Li Yundong caught the pillow and said with a wry smile, Okay, I'll turn around." Zhou Qin carefully poked her head out of the quilt and peeked at Li Yundong. Seeing that he had indeed turned around like a gentleman, she carefully put the towel into her clothes and gently wiped herself. With this wipe, Zhou Qin felt as if the towel was Li Yundong's hand, gently caressing her skin, causing her to tremble uncontrollably. Especially when she rubbed the soft peaks on her chest, her body trembled violently. Just as she was reminiscing, she suddenly heard Li Yundong cough and say, "Are you done? Don't take too long. It's not a joke for moisture to enter the body." Zhou Qin panicked. She quickly pulled out the towel and threw it at Li Yundong, saying angrily, "I'm done. Why are you rushing me?" Li Yundong caught it without looking back. As soon as he touched the towel, he felt a warm and moist feeling. His heart suddenly shook. This was the towel that Zhou Qin had used to wipe her chest just now. Although Li Yundong loved Su Chan deeply and his feelings for her had never wavered, he was still a human being after all. What's more, Zhou Qin had done so much for him. Even if he had a heart of stone, he would still be moved. At this moment, Li Yundong suddenly felt that the towel seemed to be fragrant and happy, and a faint virgin's desire rushed to his face. The moment Zhou Qin threw the towel, she also realized this. She was so shy that she shrank her head under the quilt, but after a while, she secretly peeked out a pair of eyes. She looked at the towel in Li Yundong's hand, and she was lost in thought. What is he thinking? Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong in a daze. Her eyes couldn't help but become softer and softer, like the soft water grass in a clear river, gently stirring the hard rocks by the river. At this moment, the ward was extremely quiet. Only a faint fragrance floated between the two of them, stirring their souls and seducing their hearts. Ahem, stop guessing. This book has a happy ending. What kind of happy ending? It's very simple. Good people will be rewarded, and bad people will be punished. In addition, the next chapter is the grand debut of the little girl. /om/ Chapter 228. Go to watch net. This awkward and ambiguous atmosphere lasted until Zhou Kachang entered the room. He looked at the two of them and coughed dryly. Only then did Li Yundong come to his senses. He coughed dryly and said to Zhou Kachang, "Uncle Zhou, I'll come back tomorrow. Go to watch net." 7 K.O. Hong O.M. Zhou Kachang looked at him meaningfully and nodded. "Well, that's good. You should accompany Qin more often. After all." He wanted to say, "After all, she has done so much for you." He wanted to use these words to warn Li Yundong not to be ungrateful. However, Zhou Qin was keenly aware of what Zhou Kachang was going to say next. She quickly said, "Li Yundong, if you have something to do tomorrow, you don't have to come. I'm fine." Li Yundong had already gotten up and walked to the door. He turned around and smiled. "It doesn't matter. I have nothing to do tomorrow anyway." After that, he ran away as if he wanted to escape. Zhou Kachang looked at Li Yundong's departing figure and sighed. "Why are you so stubborn? If you don't say it clearly, some people will never understand it, or pretend not to understand it." After Li Yundong left, Zhou Qin's face seemed to be wearing a mask again. She said coldly, "It's none of your business. I don't want this kind of thing that I beg for. If I want something, I always get it myself. It's not someone else's turn to give it to me." Zhou Kachang smiled bitterly and said, "Are you really stupid? If you don't take the opportunity to snatch him away now, when will you?" Zhou Qin's eyes were complicated. She was silent for a long time before she slowly said, "I am not a person who takes advantage of others' difficulties, nor am I a person who demands repayment. I like him because I like his single-mindedness. If he was a fickle person, I would have left him instead." Zhou Kachang stared at his daughter with wide eyes, as if he had met her for the first time. "Aren't you asking for trouble? Are you a pervert? Won't you be alone for the rest of your life?" Zhou Qin's eyes were blurred. She said foolishly, "As long as he can look at me more when he's free, talk to me more, and cook for me more, I'll be very happy." Zhou Kachang looked at Zhou Qin in extreme shock and said loudly, Qin, you are really crazy. You." Before he could finish his words, Zhou Qin suddenly shouted at him, "Get out. I don't want you to care about me. Get out." As she said this, she picked up everything she could pick up and threw it at Zhou Kachang. Zhou Kachang had no choice but to scurry out of the room like a rat, leaving Zhou Qin alone with the pillow in her arms. When Li Yundong returned home, as soon as he entered the door, he saw Erwan Hongling sitting in the living room watching TV. Zi Yuan was busy in the kitchen, and there was a clanging sound of chopping vegetables. "Watch net." Li Yundong was taken aback. "Don't you have your own family? What are you doing here watching TV?" Erwan Hongling rolled her eyes at him in annoyance. "My sister Zi Yuan takes care of you all day long. Can't I just come and sit around casually? Why? Don't you welcome me?" "It's fine if you don't welcome me. I'm leaving." As she said this, she stood up, patted her butt, and was about to leave. However, as if she wanted to see the world in chaos, she shouted into the kitchen, "Sister Zi Yuan, someone dislikes me and thinks I'm an eyesore. I'll go back first." Li Yundong was still a little overwhelmed by Zhou Qin. Seeing the situation at home, he suddenly felt a headache coming on. He quickly stretched out his hands and said, Okay, I'm afraid of you. You can do whatever you want." Erwan Hongling snorted and said proudly, "Well, that's what you said. I didn't force you to do this." Li Yundong was so angry that he glared at Erwan Hongling and said, "You've taken advantage of me, and you still want to show off, don't you?" Erwan Hongling and Li Yundong didn't get along well, and her natural strength was restrained. When Li Yundong glared at her, she was so scared that she jumped back and shouted, "Sister Zi Yuan, look, he's bullying me again." Zi Yuan came out of the kitchen with a dish and looked at them helplessly. "Why don't you two go back to kindergarten and quarrel?" Li Yundong and Ruan Hongling pointed at each other at the same time and shouted at the same time. She, quarreled first. After the two of them finished speaking, they were stunned at the same time. They looked at each other and shouted at the same time, "Why are you imitating my words?" Zi Yuan put down the dish in her hand and couldn't help laughing. Have you two cultivated the mind-reading ability? Are you so telepathic? Ruan Hongling immediately stomped her feet and scolded, Bah, who wants to have a telepathic connection with him? Li Yundong retorted bluntly, I don't care. I only have a telepathic connection with my little girl. Ruan Hongling said angrily, what are you proud of? You're just a witch. Li Yundong suddenly became furious. What did you say? Say it again. Ruan Hongling was so scared that she quickly ran behind Zi Yuan. She stomped her feet and said angrily, Sister Zi Yuan, look, this person doesn't give you any face at all. He's bullying your shimmy to the point where she's above your head. You don't even support me. Zi Yuan felt a headache coming on. She rubbed her temples and said, can you two stop talking? Li Yundong still respected Zi Yuan very much. He snorted, turned around, and walked towards his bedroom. Go to the internet. Zi Yuan shouted, hey, it's almost time for dinner. Li Yundong said in a muffled voice, I have no appetite. After that, he slammed the door. After Li Yundong returned to his room, he put down the fan of 7 treasures, sat by the bed, picked up the pink Hello Little money box, and was lost in thought. Girl. Li Yundong gently stroked the money box with his hand, and his eyes were surprisingly gentle. He murmured softly, where are you? I miss you so much. In the Fox Zen school, Ao Wushuang looked helplessly at Su Chan, who was looking around, scratching her ears and cheeks. She couldn't calm down. Ao Wushuang sighed and said, what's wrong with you? Why have you been so restless all day? Su Chan shrank her head and glanced at Ao Wushuang timidly. Don't be angry if I tell you. Ao Wushuang had been cultivating with Su Chan these days, but she found that not only had Su Chan not made any progress, but she had also been so tired that she couldn't calm down. In the past, although Su Chan's cultivation talent was not the top, she was at least first class. With hard work and a little luck, she could eventually cultivate to the realm of the six-tailed fox spirit. But now it seemed that since this girl had met Li Yundong, her cultivation had not improved at all. At this time, her first-class cultivation seemed to be at the bottom, which was really annoying. Ao Wushuang felt that she couldn't help but get angry. She suppressed her anger and said, if you don't tell me, won't I be angry? Su Chan responded with an, oh, and said with a grievance, then I won't say it. The blue veins on Ao Wushuang's forehead twitched. Tell me. Su Chan asked weakly, do you really want me to say it? Ao Wushuang couldn't help it. She said angrily, if you don't say it, I'll kick you out. Su Chan was shocked. She got up and ran out the door. Ao Wushuang was stunned. Hey, where are you going? You haven't told me yet. Su Chan hid at the door and peeked out an eye through the wooden door. She looked at Ao Wushuang timidly and said, aren't you going to kick me out? Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. I'm kicking you out of the sect, not out of this door. Get in here. Su Chan said, oh. She lowered her head and walked to the door. Suddenly, her eyes rolled and a plan came to her mind. She raised her hands and actually rolled on the ground, rolling into the door. Ao Wushuang was stunned. She stammered, what are you doing? Fortunately, the ground was made of bluestone, and there was no dust on Su Chan's body. She pretended to pat the dust off her body, blinked her eyes, and pretended to be puzzled. Didn't you ask me to roll in? Ao Wushuang took a deep breath and said, well, you evil disciple, I think you have made up your mind to fight with me. Su Chan giggled and quickly leaned in front of Ao Wushuang. She wrapped her arms around her and said coquettishly, Master, don't be angry. Ao Wushuang had no idea what to do with her precious disciple. She glared at Su Chan and said, "What the hell are you doing? Tell me. If you don't tell me, I won't be polite to you." Su Chan was not afraid. She cheekily said with a cheeky smile, "I think I heard Yundong calling me just now." Ao Wushuang groaned and raised her hand to rub her temples. "Oh my god, when didn't you say that?" Su Chan pouted and said, "It was true just now." Ao Wushuang said angrily, "Then tell me, when wasn't it true?" Su Chan grabbed her arm and said coquettishly, "I don't care. It must have been true just now. I could feel it." Ao Wushuang was scared. She pointed to the door and said, get out. Hurry up, I'm afraid of you. I won't force you to cultivate. When that guy passes the heavens tribulation, I'll send you over. In the future, let him have a headache. Let's see if he despises you." Su Chan was not in the mood to cultivate. She cheered and ran out. When she reached the door, she thought of something and turned around again. She giggled and said, "Master, Yundong loves me very much. He won't despise me." Ao Wushuang laughed and said, "Let's wait and see." Su Chan snorted and said, "Let's wait and see." She quickly walked out of the residence and came to the backyard. The backyard was very elegantly decorated. There were rockery and stone pavilions, small bridges and flowing water, fresh flowers and green grass, making it look quiet and elegant. Su Chan sat down on the stone bench and looked around. Then, she took out a paper crane from her pocket. She pointed at the paper crane and whispered, "Hey, wake up. I'm looking for you." Su Chan wanted the paper crane to fly to Li Yundong again to inform him, but when she poked it with her finger, she saw that it had fallen to one side, like an ordinary paper crane, motionless. It didn't look like it had no spiritual energy at all. Su Chan was shocked. No way. Is he dead? Or has he run out of spiritual energy? Su Chan used her hand to turn the paper crane upside down, but the paper crane didn't respond at all. She was suddenly very disappointed. No way. So useless. It died after a few trips. Su Chan was very disappointed when she thought that she couldn't send a message to Li Yundong. She stomped her feet bitterly, threw the paper crane forward, and said angrily, "You're so useless. I'm so angry." But just as she threw the paper crane out, the paper crane suddenly flapped its wings in midair and flew to the roof in an instant. *CK, pretending to be dead? Su Chan suddenly became furious. She stood under the eaves with her hands on her hips and scolded, "You be *starred, how dare you fight with me? Are you tired of living? Hurry up and come down, or I'll tear you apart." The paper crane had finally escaped from the devil's clutches, so how could it be willing to go back? It immediately shook its head like a rattle. Su Chan rolled up her sleeves and said angrily, "Well, if you have the guts, don't let me catch you." As she said this, she jumped and flew toward the paper crane. The paper crane was so scared that it trembled all over, turned around, and flew away. Su Chan laughed angrily and said, "Let's see where you can run to." As she said this, her body turned into a blue light and chased after it like lightning. Su Chan was fast, but the paper crane was not slow either. Every time Su Chan was about to catch it, the paper crane twisted its body and abruptly dodged. Su Chan was seething with anger. She chased after the paper crane. After flying through a dozen courtyards, she finally jumped and grabbed the crane under the eaves of a house. Su Chan was so angry that she could see smoke coming out of her nostrils. Su Chan laughed proudly. She was about to speak, but she heard a rustling sound coming from the room. Su Chan suddenly became curious, so she leaned over to take a look through the crack of the door. When she saw it, she was so shocked that her whole body quivered. /OM/ Chapter 230. Go to watch net. The paper crane, which was about to fly into Li Yundong's hand, was stopped by Mo Ashi. Li Yundong, who knew nothing about it, was still striding forward on his own cultivation path. Go to watch net. However, on his way forward, Li Yundong stopped for a while because of Zhou Qin's matter. The next day, Li Yundong still went to the hospital to visit Zhou Qin. When he arrived at the hospital, Zhou Qin was sitting on the hospital bed, surfing the internet with a laptop. There was a faint smile on her lips, and her face was no longer as cold as before. Although her smile was faint, Li Yundong felt as if there was a feeling of spring blooming in the room. To cure a disease, emotion was the most important thing. If a patient was in a bad mood every day, then even if he took elixirs, he wouldn't be able to cure the disease. Even if he was barely cured, he would get sick again sooner or later. Zhou Qin's mood returned to normal, and Li Yundong's heart also became happy. He walked into the room and said with a smile, "You look in a good mood today." Zhou Qin's biggest worry was that she might be paralyzed in the future, but now that she knew that Li Yundong could cure her legs, her worries naturally disappeared, and her mood improved. At this time, when she saw Li Yundong visiting her, she was even happier. As soon as she was happy, Zhou Qin showed a rare little girl's temper. She raised her head and deliberately said with a straight face, "I was in a good mood, but when you came, I was in a bad mood." Although she said this, the smile and happiness hidden in her eyes could not be concealed. Li Yundong also cooperated and put on a sad look. "Ah. Am I so annoying? Well, I'm leaving." Zhou Qin said angrily, "Go, go." Li Yundong walked to the door and turned his head. "Hey, I'm really leaving." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "I won't see you out." Li Yundong chuckled and really turned to go out the door. Sitting on the bed, Zhou Qin couldn't help but burst into laughter. She smiled sweetly, and her eyes moved. In an instant, the cold ward became bright and beautiful. She snorted in a low voice. "Let's see if you'll come in or not." After she finished speaking, she lowered her head and continued to look at her notebook, but her eyes glanced at the door from time to time. She looked for a while and saw that there was no one at the door. She couldn't help but think to herself, "This guy can't be so petty and really leave, right?" Zhou Qin waited for a while, but there was still no sign of Li Yundong at the door. She couldn't help but feel a little anxious. She straightened up and shouted at the door, but she was a little embarrassed to call Li Yundong's name directly. She only said, "Hey, hey." She shouted for a while. At the door, she only saw some patients and nurses passing by looking at her ward in confusion, but Li Yundong was nowhere to be seen. Watch net. Net. Super_speed. More. New. Zhou Qin panicked. Just as she was about to shout again, she suddenly heard a familiar voice beside her. "Hey, beauty, who are you calling?" Zhou Qin turned her head and saw Li Yundong standing on the other side of her. The boy she had been thinking about day and night was winking at her with a sneaky smile. Zhou Qin was startled. "Why are you here? Are you a ghost?" Li Yundong chuckled. He pointed to the door connecting the balcony corridor and the ward and said with a smile, "You have a corridor here. I walked to the ward next door, then passed through the corridor from the back door and walked in." Zhou Qin was tongue-tied. How long have you been standing next to me?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "I think it started when you said that I wanted to see if you could come in or not." Zhou Qin's face suddenly turned red. She was ashamed and annoyed. She picked up the pillow behind her and hit Li Yundong with all her might. "You're so annoying, you're so annoying. Go away, I don't want to see you." Li Yundong laughed and ran 2 steps away. He said, "Hey, do you really want me to go? Then I'll really go." Zhou Qin opened her mouth and wanted to say, "Go away," but the words were stuck in her throat. She was afraid that the boy would really leave this time. Who would she cry to? "You bastard, don't you know how to give in to me? Why do you always have to control me? Did I owe you in my previous life?" Zhou Qin thought bitterly in her heart. Don't you know that girls sometimes say one thing and mean another? You're so annoying. Seeing that Zhou Qin was silent, Li Yundong said, Hey, you're not going to say anything? Then I'm leaving. Zhou Qin immediately threw the pillow at him angrily. Go away, go away. Don't come back again. Li Yundong saw that he had made Zhou Qin angry, so he laughed and took the pillow. He stopped talking about it and sat down beside her bed. He put the fan of 7 treasures aside and said with a smile, What were you looking at just now? You looked so happy. Zhou Qin rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. What else could I be looking at? The school forum. Speaking of this, she suddenly became excited and asked Li Yundong, Are you going to perform at this year's welcome party? Welcome party? Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Isn't it today? Zhou Qin nodded excitedly like a little girl chasing after a star. Yes, what are you going to perform today? The last performance is still vivid in my mind. Li Yundong smiled. Isn't it arranged by senior sister Feng Na? It's a play from the legend of Sword and Fairy. I think it's the part where the sword sage takes Zhao Linger away. I'm going to watch it. 7 K.O.M. Zhou Qin widened her eyes and asked, Who are you going to play? You must be Li Xiaoyao, right? Li Yundong smiled and said, I'm not going to play Li Xiaoyao, the loser who ends up alone in the end. I'm going to play the sword sage. Zhou Qin let out an ah, and a yearning look appeared in her eyes. She slowly leaned back and said faintly, I really want to see it, but unfortunately, I can't. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. If you don't mind, I'll push you to see it. Zhou Qin's eyes lit up. Can I? Will it be troublesome for you? Li Yundong thought to himself, You ruined your own family for me and almost became disabled. If I don't even want to do this, wouldn't I be a cold-blooded beast? Li Yundong smiled and said, What are you talking about? Let me give you a massage, and then we'll go. Zhou Qin smiled happily. That's great. Do you want a massage now? Li Yundong nodded, picked her up, and put her in the wheelchair. Then, he pushed her out and massaged her as he had done yesterday. However, this time, he chatted with Zhou Qin as he ran his qi. By the way, why are you the only one in this ward? Zhou Qin closed her eyes and said, I booked all the other beds. I don't like to live with other patients. Li Yundong knew that Zhou Qin loved silence and was even more afraid of being harassed, so he didn't think too much about it. He asked curiously, Then why don't you stay in the VIP room? Zhou Qin snorted coldly. Isn't it because of the bureaucrats in the health system? When they saw that my father had lost power, they all came to trample on him and me. They said that the VIP rooms were all full. Humph, nonsense. The VIP rooms have never been full all year round. Others may not know, but I do. Li Yundong couldn't help but be silent when he heard this. He sighed and said, Zhou Qin, you will stand up again one day. This sentence had a double meaning, alluding to both her feat and her future life. Zhou Qin couldn't help but sigh in her heart when she heard this. She tried to move her toes and found that her toes were already flexible and obedient. She knew that she was actually fine. If she wanted to stand up, she could stand up now. But she was unwilling to stand up. In her opinion, this was the happiest period of her life. She would rather sit in a wheelchair like this for the rest of her life, as long as Li Yundong was willing to come to see her every day, talk to her, and make her laugh. Li Yundong didn't know what Zhou Qin was thinking. After he finished running his qi, he felt that the blood clots and tumors in Zhou Qin's body had almost dissipated. He asked, How do you feel now? Can you feel your feet? Zhou Qin turned her face away, not daring to look into Li Yundong's eyes. She shook her head and said, No, I don't feel anything. Li Yundong was a little disappointed and surprised. He thought to himself, how could there be no effect? This is impossible. After a while, he smiled and said, Forget it. Let's go to school first. You haven't been back for a long time. Your classmates miss you very much. Zhou Qin smiled and said, Miss me? That's not possible. It's possible that they miss you because you haven't been there for a few days. I've seen posts on the forum asking why you haven't been to school these days. Li Yundong smiled. He pushed Zhou Qin and said hello to Zhou Kachang, who happened to run into him in the corridor. Then, he also said goodbye to the nurse in charge and pushed Zhou Qin out of the hospital building. After leaving the building, Li Yundong stopped a car and put Zhou Qin in the back seat. Then, he put the collapsible car in the trunk of the car, and the two of them went to school. After getting out of the car, Li Yundong took Zhou Qin out of the car and put her in the wheelchair, then pushed her into the school. Along the way, all the students who saw Li Yundong were surprised. When they saw Zhou Qin, their eyes widened, as if they couldn't imagine why such a beautiful and elegant girl was sitting in a wheelchair. At first, Li Yundong was worried that Zhou Qin might not be able to stand the stairs. But when he saw that Zhou Qin's face was calm and composed, he couldn't help but admire her. She's a girl from a respectable family after all. Her psychological quality is really strong. Before he reached the school building, he saw Feng Na. Feng Na was surprised and happy when she saw him. Li Yundong, I finally found you. She shouted from a distance. Li Yundong saw her and Ching Cheng, who was always by her side. He suddenly laughed and said, It's you. When Feng Na and Ching Cheng saw Li Yundong, they also saw Zhou Qin in the wheelchair. Their hearts suddenly skipped a beat. After approaching Zhou Qin, they carefully greeted her and then asked, Zhou Qin, what happened? Zhou Qin smiled faintly. It's nothing. Just a small injury. I'll get better. Li Yundong was afraid that the two girls would ask about her sadness, so he quickly gave them a look. Fortunately, Feng Na and Ching Cheng were smart people, so they quickly reacted and changed the topic. Ching Cheng smiled. Li Yundong, Nana and I were just wondering if you would stand us up today. We were just talking about you, and here you are. Not bad, not bad. You're trustworthy. Li Yundong chuckled. As long as you don't cause any more trouble next time, I'll be fine. Especially you, Feng Na. Feng Na pursed her lips into a smile. When have I ever caused any trouble? Can you give me an example? Li Yundong laughed. Just as he was about to expose her, he suddenly heard a soft voice coming from behind him. Li Yundong. Li Yundong heard the voice and turned around. He was shocked. What is she doing here? Well, don't worry, the girl is silly. Fortune favors fools, /om/. Chapter 231. Go to Watch Network. Standing behind him was Ruan Hongling, who had a ponytail and was dressed in a sailor's uniform. Next to her stood Zi Yuan, who was dressed in a plain white dress. Li Yundong hadn't expected Zi Yuan to come to school at all. He asked in surprise, Why are you here? Zi Yuan was wearing a white dress, and her long black hair was tied up high, revealing her snow-white and flawless neck. She was like a noble swan, exuding a sense of holiness and pride. Her figure was slender and elegant, and there was not a trace of vulgarity about her. The surrounding students were all stunned. Feng Na and Ching Cheng were also dumbfounded. They stammered, Is she a fairy? Why is she so beautiful? Zi Yuan glanced at Li Yundong lightly. She smiled slightly and said, Can't I come? Li Yundong smiled and said, It's not that you can't come, but I didn't expect it. Did you come to see me? Ruan Hongling snorted and said, Don't flatter yourself. Sister Zi Yuan is here to see my performance. Li Yundong asked curiously, You? What performance do you have? Ruan Hongling said proudly, Don't look down on me. Li Yundong couldn't help but taunt, Who dares to look down on you? Don't cry when you go on stage later. Ruan Hongling was furious. Just as she was about to argue with Li Yundong, she suddenly heard Feng Na look at Ruan Hongling and say, "Ah, are you the freshman beauty who performed calligraphy?" Ruan Hongling snorted, shook her head, and said arrogantly, "Who else could it be?" Li Yundong suddenly asked, "By the way, I haven't asked you yet. Why did you want to study at this university? What department are you studying?" Ruan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong and said angrily, "It's none of your business. Do I have to tell you that I'm studying history?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Do you want to be an archaeologist? History department?" The boys in the history department are in trouble. Ruan Hongling said angrily, "What do you mean by that?" Seeing the two quarreling as soon as they met, Ziyuan said with a headache, "Can you two not quarrel here?" Li Yundong and Ruan Hongling looked around, and sure enough, the students around them were all staring at them with their mouths agape. Feng Na and Ching Cheng were already very outstanding beauties, and they were very eye-catching. As for Ziyuan, Ruan Hongling, Zhou Qin, and the others, they were all top-notch beauties that were rarely seen in the world. It was extremely difficult to even see one of them on normal days, let alone so many of them suddenly appearing here. Some of the freshmen looked at them with their mouths agape and tongue-tied. They couldn't help but say, "Are there so many beauties in this school? So my decision to apply to this third-rate university was actually so wise?" The senior student next to him could not help but snort disdainfully and said, "Cut the crap. You can only watch from afar and not play with her. Do you dare to go over and strike up a conversation?" The freshmen immediately laughed sheepishly. Their eyes were filled with jealousy and envy as they looked at Li Yundong, who was the center of attention. Watch net. 7ko/Feng Na was a tactful person. She smiled and said, "Let's not stand here. Let's go to the backstage of the auditorium. There are no classes today, and all the actors are there. It should be more lively now." Then, she said to Li Yundong, "By the way, since you're here, you can rehearse at the last minute. You haven't read the script yet." Feng Na couldn't help but say to Li Yundong, "How can there be an actor like you in the world?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "I'm just a guest star, not the main character." Then, he walked over to Zhou Qin and whispered, "Are you going to watch from the backstage or from the audience?" Zhou Qin had been silent at first, but now she smiled and said, "I'll watch from the audience. It's better there." Li Yundong nodded and said to Feng Na, "Then let's go to the auditorium first. It'll be good to grab a few better seats." As he spoke, the group of people ran to the school's auditorium under everyone's gaze. When they arrived at the backstage of the auditorium, they heard a commotion. Feng Na took a look and saw a group of actors who had performances backstage. A boy said loudly, "I've already called her," but no one answered. "What can I do?" No one answered. "Call again. Keep calling until it gets through. What's wrong with this woman? How can she be late for such an important event tonight?" A girl in an ancient costume said loudly. "Go to the internet." 7kom. Feng Na frowned and squeezed through the crowd. What happened? The girl turned her head, and a look of joy suddenly appeared on her face. "Nana, you're here? Lu Ling hasn't come yet. I can't get through to her phone. I'm so worried." Feng Na frowned and said, "You can't get through to her cell phone?" The girl stamped her feet and said, "I can, but no one is picking up. That's why I'm so worried." Beside him, a boy dressed in an ancient costume, wearing a blue robe and a blue headscarf on his head, suddenly said, "Could something have happened?" As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd spat in unison, "Bah, you jinx." Li Yundong pulled Feng Na's arm and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong? Who is Lu Ling? An actress? If her role is not important, can't we just find someone to replace her?" Feng Na smiled bitterly and said, "She's playing Zhao Ling, Do you think we can replace her?" Li Yundong was shocked. "No way. The lead actor is not here yet?" But then he comforted her and said, "It's okay. There are still 4 or 5 hours before the show starts. It's still early. They will come. Feng Na smiled bitterly and said, that's the only way to think. With that, she turned to the actors backstage and said, come on, let's get to know each other. The most important minor character of this play is finally here. Let's welcome the Sword Sage. The actors backstage had already recognized the famous figures of the school, and they all applauded and laughed. They glanced at Li Yundong and naturally saw Zi Yuan, who was not far away from him. They were all shocked by her ethereal temperament and beautiful appearance and felt ashamed of their inferiority. Li Yundong smiled at the crowd and said, I'm just here to be a bystander. You guys go on. Feng Na pulled over the girl who had spoken at the beginning and said with a smile, this is Yu Lu, the actress who plays Lin Yueru. Yu Lu was beautiful. Although she was not as good as Feng Na and could not be compared with Zhou Qin and the others, she was still above average. She shook hands with Li Yundong generously and said, let's shake hands. Li Yundong deliberately put on a straight face and shook hands with her with a serious expression. Yu Lu giggled and said, Sword Sage, please be merciful. Li Yundong waved his hand and sighed with a face full of vicissitudes. I have sealed my sword for many years. Is there anyone in the world who is worthy of my hand? His deliberately showing off made everyone in the backstage laugh. Zhou Qin, Feng Na, and the others covered their mouths and laughed. Ruan Hongling laughed and said, Bah, you're really boasting. You don't even know how to control a sword, but you dare to say that you have sealed your sword? You're so shameless. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, couldn't help smiling when she heard Li Yundong's words, but when she heard Ruan Hongling's words, she immediately glared at her. Ruan Hongling knew that she had spilled the beans and immediately stuck out her tongue. Feng Na laughed for a while and introduced the other characters in the play. The one who played Li Xiaoyao was the boy who had worn a cyan headscarf and pretended to be dressed up. His name was Zhong Xiugua, and he was handsome, comparable to Hu Gu. But to Li Yundong's surprise, the one who played Gai Luojiao turned out to be Jiang Xiuxiu, who had made a big mistake before. When Jiang Xiuxiu saw Li Yundong looking at her, she greeted him embarrassedly and then found an excuse to hide in the crowd. Li Yundong felt a little funny in his heart. He smiled at Feng Na and said, I remember that Gai Luojiao's role should be the most important, right? Can Jiang Xiuxiu do it? Feng Na smiled and said, she is an acting major, and her lines are very good. Don't look down on her. Li Yundong smiled and said, how dare I look down on professionals? However, if I want to play the Sword Sage, you have to give me a prop, right? You can't let me go on stage empty-handed, can you? Feng Na giggled and said, I've already thought about this. After that, she called to the backstage, Yan Hua, bring the sword over. As soon as he heard the name, Li Yundong immediately asked in confusion, have you made up with him? Feng Na smiled and said, Comrade Li Yundong, the president of the student union must be tolerant. I made him the vice president of the student union. Li Yundong cupped his hands and said, I admire you. The president is really a prime minister. You're amazing. After a while, Yan Hua came over with a long sword in his arms. He looked at Li Yundong with vigilance and hostility and snorted. Don't break my sword. As he said this, he took out the sword, but it was not for Li Yundong, but for Feng Na. Li Yundong laughed in his heart, this boy is really petty. Feng Na took the long sword and said with a smile, what kind of family heirloom is this? Is it so important? Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, saw the sword and suddenly widened her eyes. She cried out involuntarily, Yan Hua, did you steal your family heirloom? Yan Hua's face turned red. He braced himself and said, what do you mean by stealing? Isn't what belongs to my family also mine? Ruan Hongling turned her head and looked at Zi Yuan in shock. Sister Zi Yuan, isn't this? Zi Yuan shook her head at her, signaling for her to stop talking. Ruan Hongling's heart trembled and she swallowed the rest of her words. Although the others had only seen the antique sword, there was nothing extraordinary about it. Naturally, they didn't know what was so important about what Wan Hongling hadn't said. But Li Yundong paid attention to it. He walked over to Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling and asked in a low voice, "What did you just say? What's wrong with this sword?" Wan Hongling looked at Zi Yuan. Seeing Zi Yuan nod, she looked at the sword and said in a low voice, "This is the Liuhe, the sword of my second Shibwa. It and my master's Bahuang's sword, which is the Bahuang sword in Ao Wushuang's hand, were originally a pair of swords." "Your second Shibwa's sword?" Li Yundong was shocked. He suddenly looked at Yan Hua and said, "Is he also a cultivator?" "No way. == tomorrow at the third watch of the night, /om/. Chapter 232. Go to Watch Network. When Wan Hongling heard Li Yundong's words, she sneered and said, "Him? What kind of cultivator is this guy with great ambition but little talent?" However, there was indeed a cultivator in his family, but no one in the family knew about it, not even Yan Hua. "This sword belongs to Yan Hua's aunt, who is also my second Shibwa. My second Shibwa met my master when she was 14 years old, and then she became a monk with him. 9 years ago, she went to the Fox Zen school to make trouble for Ao Wushuang, and then her whereabouts were unknown." Listening to this past, she couldn't help but show a look of vicissitudes of life in her eyes. "I didn't expect that I would see my master's Bahuang's sword 2 months ago, and now I see my second Shibwa's Liuhe sword here. Could this be a coincidence?" Li Yundong asked in confusion, "Why is your second Shibwa's sword in Yan Hua's hand?" Wan Hongling snorted and said, "Second Shibwa didn't take her sword with her before she left. She left it in the Yan family and just told us to keep an eye on it. One day, she would take it back." Li Yundong was about to speak when he saw Feng Na walking over and asking curiously, "What are you talking about?" Li Yundong turned around and said with a smile, "Nothing, we're talking about this sword." Feng Na handed the sword in her hand to Li Yundong. "Here, your prop sword." Li Yundong took the sword and looked at it while asking, "Why did you think of asking Yan Hua for this sword as a prop?" Feng Na smiled and said, "I just asked if anyone had a classical sword to use as a prop, and Yan Hua volunteered." Li Yundong suddenly understood. He stroked the scabbard of the sword with his hand and felt that it was delicate and soft. Wan Hongling said, "The scabbard of this sword is made of shark skin. Its surface is smooth and hard, and it's very wear-resistant." Li Yundong nodded. His fingers swept to the hilt of the sword, and he saw a fine pattern engraved on the edge of the sword. It looked like a very special rune or character. Li Yundong pressed his hand on the hilt of the sword and immediately felt a hidden power in the sword stirring. Li Yundong's heart trembled. He took a deep breath and pulled out the Liuhe with a clang. In an instant, the treasured sword was unsheathed. The body of the sword emitted a faint light and a buzzing sound, like the cry of a dragon and the cry of a phoenix. Except for Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling, the surrounding people were all surprised. Feng Na even cried out involuntarily, "Is this the legendary sword recognizing its master?" This was too amazing. How could it call out? "Li Yundong, how did you do it?" Yan Hua stared at Li Yundong with his eyes wide open, feeling annoyed and angry. Why does this guy always want to be in the limelight? Damn it, this is my family's sword. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have brought it. But he couldn't go back on his word now. He was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices, and his nose was almost crooked. Seeing that he was looking at the sword obsessively, she nodded to him and said, "Li Yundong, come here. I have something to say to you. Watch net." Li Yundong nodded and put away the long sword. As soon as the Liuhe was sheathed, the light and buzzing sound immediately disappeared, making the students backstage click their tongues in wonder. Zi Yuan walked to a corner and whispered to Li Yundong, "Li Yundong, this is my second Shibwa's sword. I hope you can use it well." Li Yundong laughed and said, "What, are you afraid that I'll take it for myself?" Don't worry, I have the fan of 7 treasures. I won't swallow your second Shirbua's sword. Besides, isn't it Yan Hua's? Ziyuan shook her head and said, no, since this sword has fallen into your hands, it must have been arranged by fate. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing when he heard this. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly thought of something. No wonder Wan Hongling and Yan Hua have such a good relationship. It turns out that they can be said to be friends. The two of them came to this school together, and in the end, this sword fell into my hands because of chance. Although I only borrowed it temporarily, it can't be said to be predestined. As Li Yundong thought about it, he suddenly felt as if there was really an invisible hand in this world pulling the invisible thread between people. He couldn't help but be a little dazed. After a while, he came to his senses and looked a little solemn. I see. I will keep it for your second Shirbua. Ziyuan opened her mouth and was about to speak when they suddenly heard a noise coming from backstage. The two of them turned their heads and saw a girl stumbling into the backstage. Some people cheered. Okay, she's finally here. Feng Na also went up to greet her. She saw that the girl's hair was disheveled, her steps were weak, and her body was full of a strong smell of cigarettes and alcohol. She immediately covered her nose and frowned. Lu Ling, what have you been doing? Lu Ling, who was playing Zhao Linger, raised her head, giggled, and said with a big tongue, I'm sorry. I played too much, hee hee. Seeing Lu Ling's appearance, Feng Na frowned more and more. What's wrong with you? Did you know that there's a performance today? Lu Ling frowned and said unhappily, what's wrong? Don't we still have 4 hours? Feng Na had just become the president of the student union, and it was the first time she had organized such an important program since she was elected. Now she had encountered such a thing. She could imagine how unhappy she was. She suppressed her anger and said, so many people are waiting for you. Don't you feel embarrassed? You're performing tonight, and you've made yourself look like this. You don't look like a human, and you don't look like a ghost. Don't you feel embarrassed? Lu Ling stood up and said loudly, what's wrong with me? Is my current appearance not good? After saying that, she pushed her hair back. When the people around saw this, there was an uproar. Watch net. 7ko/Li Yundong took a look and immediately thought to himself, oh my god, how is this Zhao Linger? This was clearly not mainstream. The makeup on Lu Ling's face was like a pot of colorful ink splashed on her face. Her eyes were as black as a panda's, and her lips were painted with purple lipstick. She really looked like a demon. Not to mention Zhao Ling, even if she was playing the role of the kitchen god, she would look a bit fierce. The other actors in the show were not happy, and they all criticized, Lu Ling, what are you doing? Look at you. Do you look like a human? Did you take drugs yesterday? Why do you look like this? Hey, how are you going to perform later? Aren't you going to die? Feng Na was furious. Lu Ling, go look at yourself in the mirror. Look at yourself now. Can you perform? Write a self-reflection after the performance. Lu Ling shook her head and snorted. Yes, of course I can. I am fine, aren't I? You want me to write a self-reflection? I won't write it. If you have the ability, then don't ask me to perform. Feng Na was furious. If you don't want to act, then don't. Even a pig would be more suitable to play Zhao Linger. Lu Ling said angrily, fine, I'll leave now. I'll see who you find to play Zhao Linger. She turned around and left. Feng Na sneered. Zhao Linger is not a stutterer. Lu Ling turned around and was about to retort when she suddenly twisted her foot. With a scream, she fell down the stairs backstage. Suddenly, there was an uproar backstage. The students rushed over. Feng Na hurriedly ordered a student, send her to the hospital. What the hell? Ching Ching watched as the male student supported Lu Ling, who was crying and holding her ankle. Nana, she said worriedly, there are only 4 hours left. What should we do? Fong Na's face darkened. She hadn't expected that such a thing would happen. She was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan as she paced around the backstage. The other students were also discussing and whispering to each other. Their topics revolved around what had just happened, but most of them were discussing who would play the role of Zhao Linger. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly at Fong Na. Fong Na, why did you find Lu Ling, a non-mainstream actress, to play Zhao Linger? That's not the way to make a breakthrough, is it? Fong Na smiled bitterly. Oh my God, don't tease me. I'm in a hurry. Lu Ling used to be pretty good. She was a pretty girl. Who knew that she would play so crazily? Li Yundong sighed. I'm not being sarcastic, but where are you going to find an actress to play Zhao Linger? You know, the actress is beautiful, but the most important thing is that she has a fresh and clean temperament. Hearing this, Fong Na glanced at Zhou Qin with a sad face and said, actually, Zhou Qin's acting is quite good, but now she. Zhou Qin had been sitting quietly in her wheelchair and watching the crowd. When she saw Fong Na looking at her, she spread her hands and made a helpless gesture. Fong Na rubbed her temples with a bitter smile and murmured to herself, who should I find? While she was worrying, she suddenly shouted, I know who to find. Then, she looked in a direction. Her shout immediately attracted everyone backstage to look at her. Then, their gazes followed her gaze in unison. Li Yundong couldn't help but follow their gazes. He saw Zi Yuan standing in the center of everyone's attention with a confused face, at a loss. She will play Zhao Linger? Good, good, good. Li Yundong laughed out loud and said the word, good, 3 times in a row. Ruan Hongling also looked at Zi Yuan curiously. She was also amused and said with a smile, Sister Zi Yuan, you are quite suitable to play Zhao Linger. But you are a little more mature than Zhao Linger, and your temperament is definitely good enough. Zi Yuan glared at Ruan Hongling. You are so rude. How dare you make fun of your Shiji? Ruan Hongling giggled and said, Sister Zi Yuan, I was right. Don't you see that so many people are looking at you? This is what everyone expects of you. Fong Na also came over and smiled apologetically. Well, may I know your name? How should I address you? Zi Yuan glanced at her faintly and said, I don't dare. Just call me Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan's gaze made Fong Na feel ashamed of her inferiority. She subconsciously wanted to turn around and leave. She felt that standing in front of Zi Yuan was like an ugly duckling standing in front of a white swan. She was also a beauty, but compared with Zi Yuan, it was like heaven and earth. However, Fong Na had an important task to do, so she could only bite the bullet and say with a smile, well, Sister Zi Yuan, as you can see, we are in urgent need of an important role. I think you are the most suitable. What do you think? Without hesitation, Zi Yuan said, no way. Fong Na suddenly choked, and the smile on her face froze. She was complaining in her heart, but when she saw Li Yundong snickering, she suddenly became angry. She kicked Li Yundong's calf and said fiercely, hey, help me. Li Yundong dodged the kick and said to Fong Na with a smile, go do your thing. I will persuade her. Fong Na lowered her voice and said, hey, you must get it done, or I will die miserably. Li Yundong waved at her and said, go ahead. Li Yundong drove Fong Na away, then turned around and said to Zi Yuan while holding back his laughter, hey, are you really not going to act? It was rare for Zi Yuan to show her feminine side. She rolled her eyes at Li Yundong and said, do you really want to see me make a fool of myself? Li Yundong smiled and said, didn't you say that cultivators have to taste all kinds of things in the world? Now the opportunity has come. In a while, you will be able to taste what it feels like to stand under the colorful lights on the stage and receive the attention of thousands of people. This will definitely help your cultivation. Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but admire Li Yundong in her heart. This guy is really good at talking. He is targeting my Shiji's weakness. Sure enough, Zi Yuan hesitated for a moment and asked, will this be useful? Li Yundong pretended to be elegant. He drew a sword flower with the long sword in his hand and then made a very cool pose. He sighed and said, if you don't experience a big scene, how can you say that you have walked in the world? How can you say that your Taoist heart is as stable as a rock? Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. She asked Wan Hongling, then who is Zhao Linger? Seeing that Zi Yuan had agreed, Wan Hongling immediately shouted excitedly, Sister Zi Yuan, you agree? Zi Yuan glared at her and said, you just want to see the world in chaos. Wan Hongling giggled and explained Zhao Linger and the legend of the sword and fairy to her Shiji, who had been cultivating all year round. Zi Yuan thought for a moment and sighed. Since I'm here, I'll take it easy. Well, I'll act. What do you need me to do? Hearing this, Wan Hongling was so excited that she jumped 3 feet high. Great, there's a good show to watch. Zi Yuan looked at her with a mixture of anger and amusement, then asked Li Yundong, by the way, what are you going to play? Li Yundong put the long sword in his hand behind his back, made a finger gesture, and said arrogantly, I will play the role of the sword sage who snatched you away from Li Xiaoyao, the version of the legend of the sword and fairy, Wang Hu. After that, he laughed proudly, as if it was a very happy thing to see Zi Yuan suffer a setback. Let's go out to eat and release the first chapter in advance, /om/. Chapter 233. Go to watch net. When Feng Na saw that Zi Yuan had agreed to play Zhao Linger, she was overjoyed. She laughed proudly and said, with this fairy sister joining us, our show will be shocking. Li Yundong laughed and scolded, is this a beauty pageant? Feng Na made a face at him and said, you don't understand. It's an eye-catching economy now. Then, she said to the crowd in a low voice, this fairy sister will play Zhao Linger. Do you have any objections? Everyone laughed and said loudly, no. But one of the boys shouted, I have an objection. Everyone looked at him in unison and saw that it was Zhong Xiugua, who was playing Li Xiaoyao. He said with a depressed expression, I feel a lot of pressure to be paired with such a beautiful woman. The surrounding students immediately jeered, TSK. If you can't do it, hurry up and come down. There are plenty of people who want to play. That's right, it's a blessing in disguise. Zhong Xiugua glanced at Zi Yuan and felt that this girl had a noble aura that was simply unattainable. Not to mention standing in front of her and acting, even looking at her would make his heart beat wildly for a long time. He smiled bitterly and said, whoever wants to play can play it. When Feng Na saw that the male lead actually wanted to quit, she quickly coaxed him, don't. How difficult is it to get such a good opportunity? Zhong Xiugua, you are a film and television performance major. Did you go to class for nothing? How are you going to act in the future? Don't worry. When this beautiful woman changes into her costume, you'll feel like you're on the scene. Zhong Xiugua muttered a few words. No one knew what he had said, but at least he stopped talking about quitting. Feng Na spent a lot of time dealing with these people, but she was so tired that she was sweating profusely. Li Yundong took the paper she handed over and glanced at it for a while. He saw that there were very few lines on it. The main thing was to go out and put on a few poses. After that, he would snatch away the beautiful Zhao Linger, and it would be a success. After taking a few glances and memorizing the lines, Li Yundong focused his attention on the Liuhe sword. He tried to transfer his Jinqi into the sword and immediately felt a strong force rebound. This force was soft and lingering, but there was a feeling of hidden needles in its softness. From time to time, it pricked Li Yundong's fingertips. There was hardness in softness, and yang in yin. Obviously, it was the Dharma power and Jinqi left by a master. Watch net. Net. Super_speed. More. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he didn't dare to try again for a while. Otherwise, there would be a flying sword battle that was comparable to computer special effects. Time passed quickly, and before they knew it, it was already night. More and more actors were gathering backstage in the auditorium. After Li Yundong and the others had a boxed lunch backstage, he saw that the auditorium was already full of people, so he pushed Zhou Qin off the stage and told Ching Cheng to take care of her. Only then did he return backstage. When he returned to the backstage, he saw Feng Na waving at him. Hey, come over here. Get your makeup done. I've been looking for you. Li Yundong was stunned and pointed at himself. I need to put on makeup? Feng Na was familiar with him, so she didn't stand on ceremony. She walked behind him, pushed him to the dressing table, and then pressed him to sit down. Nonsense, who doesn't need makeup on stage? If you don't put on makeup, you'll look like a zombie in the light. After Li Yundong sat down, he looked up and saw a very feminine man walking over with a makeup box in his hand. Before he got close, he could smell a strong smell of makeup. Li Yundong was shocked and thought to himself, this guy is not a makeup artist. This guy is not a makeup artist. The man walked up to him, stretched out his orchid-shaped fingers, and pinched a piece of powder in his hand. He said with a sweet smile, "Oh, it's my honor to be able to put on makeup for the sword sage." Li Yundong's hair stood on end, and he thought to himself, damn, this guy is really a makeup artist. Feng Na burst into laughter. She patted Li Yundong on the shoulder and said, just enjoy it. Seeing that she was about to turn around and leave, Li Yundong didn't even have time to call out to her. He could only smile bitterly and say to the trap, Miss, please be merciful. The trap smiled sweetly and said, I wouldn't dare to be ruthless towards Sir Sword Sage. Otherwise, if Sir Sword Sage were to stab me with his sword, I wouldn't be able to bear it. If this was really said by a beautiful woman, then it could also be regarded as sexual harassment, and Li Yundong could reluctantly accept it. But if it was said by a man, then... Li Yundong felt cold all over. He smiled dryly and didn't dare to speak again. He closed his eyes and stretched out his neck, ready to die a heroic death. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. On one side, some girls who had already put on makeup surrounded Li Yundong and watched him put on makeup. The girls who usually didn't dare to look at him now dared to point at him and make comments. About half an hour later, Li Yundong could already hear the program starting backstage. Next to him, the trap said, well, let's watch. Only then did Li Yundong dare to open his eyes. When he opened his eyes, he saw a white-haired man with an old face in the mirror in front of him. His cheeks were thin to begin with. At this time, after putting on makeup, the hair on both sides fell down again, making his temperament even more like an unsheathed sharp sword, extremely cold and outstanding. The surrounding girls sighed. At this time, Feng Na also came over and looked at Li Yundong carefully, then gave the trap a thumbs up and said, not bad, you really have some skills. As she said this, she pushed Li Yundong into the dressing room again. Hurry up, go and change into your costume. It's all ready for you. Li Yundong was manipulated by her like a puppet, so he had no choice but to enter the dressing room. When he came out after changing his clothes, the people around him immediately cheered when they saw him. Li Yundong had a head full of white hair and a 2-inch white beard. His long hair trailed over his shoulders, and he wore a long robe that was whiter than snow. On his back was a sword with a red tassel hanging from it. Standing there, he gave off the feeling of a towering mountain. Everyone felt that the person standing in front of them was not a college student, but a sword immortal great grandmaster that only existed in games. Ordinary people would inevitably have an indescribable feeling when dressed in this way, but when Li Yundong wore it, he gave people a strong classical and cold beauty, as if he had really walked out of a game. Damn! Feng Na gasped. Even she had not expected that Li Yundong would be able to play the temperament of a sword sage so perfectly. She stammered, if you participate in SPLY, you will definitely win first place. Li Yundong didn't answer. He just glanced at her from the corner of his eye. His eyes were full of vicissitudes and coldness, as if he had seen all the love and hatred in the world. Feng Na shuddered at Li Yundong's gaze. What kind of gaze is that, she thought. He is obviously a college student younger than me. Why does he have such vicissitudes and cold eyes? This kind of gaze can't be faked. What on earth has he experienced? Li Yundong glanced at Feng Na and snorted. He lifted his robe and sat down on a stool, thinking to himself, this B*TCH is really good at manipulating this old man. If I don't teach you a lesson, you won't know what a sword sage is. His arrogance were really no different from that of a sword sage. Some of the performing arts students nearby were stunned. Jiang Xiuxiu, who was playing the role of Gai Luojiao, stared at Li Yundong with wide eyes. Did he study acting before? How can he act so vividly? Feng Na saw that Li Yundong seemed to be immersed in the role ahead of time. She rolled her eyes, then came behind Li Yundong and called out to a classmate, "Hey, hurry up and take a picture of me and Lord Sword Sage." As she said this, she made a V-shaped gesture and grinned. That student was also quick-witted. He took out his camera and snapped a photo. With Feng Na's lead, the students in the backstage immediately burst into an uproar. They crowded in front of the Sword Saint and posed for all kinds of PSS photos. Li Yundong was depressed. Well, they actually used me as a prop to take a photo. While he was feeling depressed, he saw a girl who was squatting next to him and was pretending to be a non-mainstream pout. She turned around and said angrily, "Lord Sword Sage, please smile, okay?" Li Yundong let out a long sigh, stroked his beard, and said, "You all take photos of me as a scenery and don't give me a dime after the photo. How can I smile?" The students around him laughed. "Lord Sword Sage, how much does it cost to take one photo?" 2 yuan a time. Damn, isn't it too cheap? It should be at least 3 yuan. 3 yuan? Well, I'll take 10 photos. Let me ask weekly, how much is a monthly package? A monthly package? Damn, I'm a VIP package for the whole year. The veins on Li Yundong's forehead twitched when he heard this. A bunch of B** stards. Just as they were making a fuss, they suddenly heard an uproar coming from a corner of the backstage. Everyone's eyes immediately turned to look. Zi Yuan was wearing a blue and white gown and a pair of navy blue trousers. She walked out of the changing room gracefully. Her hair was in 2 braids, and there was an ethereal aura in her purity. Her dark eyes were ethereal and deep, making people feel calm and serene at first glance. Li Yundong was also stunned. He thought to himself, this is the enhanced version of Zhao Linger. The ethereal aura on Zi Yuan's body is too strong. It lacks the childishness that Zhao Linger should have at this time, but it has more of an immortal aura. Wherever Zi Yuan went, the sound disappeared. Everyone stared blankly at the woman who had walked from the sky to the mortal world. When Zi Yuan walked to Li Yundong's side, she suddenly lowered her voice and said to Li Yundong, "Do I look strange? Why are they all staring at me?" Li Yundong almost laughed out loud. "It's not strange. It's very good. They're all looking at you because you are so beautiful." Zi Yuan's cheeks turned slightly red. She was about to speak again, but she saw the people next to her pointing at her and Li Yundong. They whispered to each other, "Hey, do you find that when these 2 people stand together, their temperament is very compatible?" Well, indeed, they are both immortal figures. When they stand together, they are really blessed by immortals. Ordinary people like us can't compare. I envy them so much. But their ages don't match, do they? Idiot, we're talking about temperament. Besides, isn't it very popular for old couples to have young wives now? When Zi Yuan heard this, her Taoist heart was slightly disturbed for a moment, and her face became more and more flushed. At first, Zhong Xiugua, who was playing Li Xiaoyao, felt very ashamed when he saw Zi Yuan, but when he heard this, he thought to himself, no matter what, she is now my Linger. Li Yundong was also very embarrassed when he heard this. He coughed dryly and was about to change the topic when he suddenly saw Wan Hongling rush into the backstage from the stage. She said to Ziyuan with a smile on her face, "Sister Ziyuan, I've finished my performance. It's your turn to go on stage." As she spoke, she rolled her eyes and whispered to Li Yundong, "Hey, I'll take care of your fan of 7 treasures for you. Don't hold my sister Ziyuan back when you go on stage later." Li Yundong laughed and said in a low voice, "I'm afraid that she will hold me back." Wan Hongling rolled her eyes at him and didn't say anything else. Feng Na was shocked. "It's our turn to go on stage." She stood up, glanced at the program list, and slapped her thigh. D****, it's a mess. Comrades, it's time to go on stage. Get ready. The students backstage who were going on stage in a while answered loudly. They tidied up their clothes one after another. Taking advantage of the lights being turned off on the stage, the actors who had scenes to play at the beginning filed in. Not long after, the heavy curtain slowly opened, and the dazzling light shone on the stage. The most anticipated drama of Tiannan University had begun. /om/ Chapter 234. Go to watch net. The Sword Sage, played by Li Yundong, appeared at the end of the play. Before he appeared, he had been standing behind the curtain and watching the play on the stage. Go to watch net. 7K.O. Hong O. MIT had to be said that Feng Na had chosen the play very well. After her modification, this play reflected the tension of a literary play and the fiery and wonderful action play. Moreover, she was temporarily the president of the Taekwondo club, so it was very convenient and easy for her to transfer a few experts from the club to act as extras and action guides. This play was about Li Xiaoyao and Lin Yueru following Zhao Linger's footsteps all the way. They happened to meet Guy Luojiao and Elder Shi, who had taken Zhao Linger away. The two sides fought fiercely, and Elder Shi was outnumbered. In the end, he blew himself up and died with everyone. At this time, the Sword Sage happened to pass by and saw Zhao Linger. Seeing that she was a demon soul and a human body, and seeing the corpses all over the ground, he thought that she had killed them, so he took her away in anger. In order to make this play more tense, Feng Na modified the part where Li Xiaoyao and Lin Yueru were knocked out by Guy Luojiao. In the end, it was changed to Li Xiaoyao did not faint, and the Sword Sage forcibly took Zhao Linger away. Li Xiaoyao fought with the Sword Sage head-on and was defeated without any suspense. In the end, he looked at Zhao Linger across the air and shed tears on the stage. Thinking of this play, Li Yundong felt strange in his heart. He thought to himself, why does this play seem so much like Ao Wushuang taking my girl away? It's not so appropriate, is it? Is Feng Na doing this on purpose or is it just a coincidence? While he was muttering in his heart, he saw that the fight between Guy Luojiao and Elder Shi had already begun on the stage. This fight was also designed in accordance with the rules. When had the students under the stage seen such a play with swords and swords? All of them cheered and cheered to their heart's content. In the end, Elder Shi was outnumbered. After saying a few words, all the lights on the stage suddenly lit up, so that everyone couldn't help but cover their eyes. Suddenly, all the lights went out, and the stage was dark. At this time, Li Yundong knew that Elder Shi had perished together with everyone. It was time for him to appear. The news that the legend of the sword and fairy was going to be performed at the freshman welcoming party had spread throughout the school a few days ago. Many people were focused on how Li Yundong would play the role of the sword saint, but they were more interested in how the fight would be handled, especially when Elder Shi self-destructed. Everyone wanted to know how to perform on stage. Many people even debated about it on the school forum, but most of them didn't come to a conclusion. But at this time, seeing that Feng Na handled the scene so cleverly, those who knew the ropes immediately cheered, while those who did not know the ropes inevitably felt a little disappointed. One by one, they craned their necks to look at the dark stage, eagerly waiting for the sword saint to appear. Watch net. 7 KOM. Sure enough, before long, a beam of light suddenly fell from above and shone on Li Yundong's body. As soon as Li Yundong appeared, his strong aura and temperament, which was extremely close to the Sword Saints, immediately attracted the students under the stage to shout excitedly. Even Li Yundong himself hadn't expected that as soon as he appeared on the stage, there would be a tsunami of applause, cheers, shouts, and all kinds of things. It was like a noisy torrent rushing to the stage, so much so that he couldn't even hear his own lines. For a moment, the actors on the stage and Feng Na and the others backstage all felt their hearts skip a beat. They thought to themselves, what should we do? This is going to be an awkward silence. Fortunately, Li Yundong had an idea. He backhandedly took out the sword on his back, and then pulled out half of it with a clang. In an instant, the sword was out of the box. Li Yundong used his qi, and suddenly the Lyoha let out a sword cry like a dragon's roar, which resounded through the auditorium. Although everyone's voices were loud, they couldn't cover this sound. Everyone was surprised and couldn't help but stop. They all stared at the stage with wide eyes. The auditorium suddenly fell silent. The students under the stage thought that this had been deliberately arranged and that the sound had been recorded and played through the loudspeaker, but the actors on the stage and the backstage staff knew that this was all caused by Li Yundong. After Li Yundong showed his skills and stunned the students under the stage, he glanced around and said coldly and majestically to Zhao Linger, "Did you kill all these people?" Zi Yuan was naturally intelligent. She was also very into the role and denied it in panic. She shook her head and stepped back. Her appearance made the boys below the stage feel pity for her. They wished they could step forward and stand up for her. Li Yundong snorted coldly. "There are corpses all over the ground, and you are the only one around. If it wasn't you, then who killed them? You devil, how dare you deny it?" As he said this, Li Yundong was about to step forward according to the script. At this time, Li Xiaoyao rushed out to protect Zhao Linger and shouted, "She didn't kill them. I can testify." Li Yundong snorted coldly, flicked his sleeves, and shook Li Xiaoyao off. "Ignorant boy, get out of my way." As he said this, he reached out to grab Zhao Linger. At this time, Li Xiaoyao pulled out his long sword with a clang and shouted at Li Yundong, who was playing the role of the sword sage, "Look at the sword." At this moment, a sudden change occurred. The Lyoha behind Li Yundong suddenly made a clanging sound and suddenly came out of the sheath. The long sword emitted a faint brilliance, and the sword body floated in the air, making a clear sword sound. Go to the net. 7 KOM. Net. Super_speed. More. New. The magical item was psychic, and it also had similar feelings as human beings. The long sword let out a long cry, and Li Yundong clearly heard it. He could clearly hear the joy of a servant seeing its master, as well as the excitement and emotion of reuniting after a long time. Before Li Yundong could react, Zi Yuan's expression suddenly changed dramatically. Her figure suddenly flashed, and in an instant, she jumped in front of Li Yundong. With her back facing him, she faced an empty space on the stage. She slapped out her palm and shouted, "Appear." There was a faint green light in her hand, and she slapped it in front of her. With a buzzing sound, the surrounding air was compressed, and in an instant, countless golden hairpins suddenly appeared in the air, piercing through the air and fiercely stabbing towards her. Zi Yuan pushed Li Yundong away and said quickly, "Go and get the Lyoha." After that, a purple ribbon suddenly appeared in her hand. She turned her wrist, and the purple ribbon immediately began to spin rapidly. As she spun, she retreated. The purple ribbon was pulled into a spiral cone, and in the middle of the cone were sharp golden hairpins. These golden hairpins were like a school of fish in a fishing net in the entanglement of the purple ribbon. They no longer had any power and could only struggle helplessly. Zi Yuan used this purple ribbon to forcibly slow down the sharp stab of these golden hairpins. She suddenly opened her eyes, and there was a flash of light in them. She slapped at the golden hairpins that had appeared out of nowhere and shouted, "Break!" With a clattering sound, these golden hairpins, which had lost their momentum, were immediately blown back by her. However, when they flew into the air, they formed a 5-inch-long phoenix-tail golden hairpin. Zi Yuan stared at the golden hairpin floating in the air with vigilance. She took a deep breath and was shocked in her heart. Is this the threaded hairpin of soul traversal of Mo Ashi of the Fox Zen School? How could it be here? Zi Yuan had pushed Li Yundong away in a hurry, but she had pushed him off the stage. Just as Li Yundong was about to fall off the stage, he suddenly twisted his waist and spun his heels on the edge of the stage. His whole body turned over like a hawk, and his posture was extremely elegant. He stopped falling and stabilized himself on the stage. After he stabilized his body, he stamped his feet and grabbed the Lyoha floating in the air like a bolt of lightning. As soon as the Lyoha was held by Li Yundong, it struggled frantically. Li Yundong only felt an extremely powerful force coming from his hand. This force shook him so much that he could hardly hold the hilt of the sword with his 5 fingers. The long sword was about to fall out of his hand. It was as if he had grabbed a primitive beast, an ancient monster that he could not control at all. The Lyoha was buzzing, and the sound of the sword resounded through the auditorium. Suddenly, the Lyoha shook violently and broke free from Li Yundong's 5 fingers. The tip of the sword suddenly swung and stabbed toward Li Yundong's throat. This sudden attack came without warning. Li Yundong was shocked, but it was not the first time he had suddenly encountered a life-and-death situation. Without thinking, he flicked the finger of his right hand toward the blade of the sword and firmly flicked it. With a clang, the Lyoha was bounced askew, and the sharp blade brushed past Li Yundong's neck. When Li Yundong's neck was brushed by the blade, he suddenly got goosebumps all over his body. At this moment, he felt that death had brushed past him. What's going on? Who wants to kill me? Li Yundong was shocked and angry. He reacted quickly. When the Lyoha passed by him, he grabbed the hilt of the sword with his hand. As soon as his fingers touched the hilt, he felt the long sword suddenly turn and the blade cut toward his neck. Li Yundong was shocked. He flipped in the air and shrank his head. The long sword was close to his head. Then, he took advantage of the momentum of flipping in the air and gave a loud shout. He stabbed the Lyoha into the floor of the stage. With a thud, the Lyoha was stabbed into the floor like a sword in the stone. Only half of the sword was exposed. It was buzzing and trembling, as if it was trying to struggle out of the ground. Li Yundong had the experience of taming magic weapons, so he immediately poured the huge jinqi in his body into the Lyoha. As he poured it in, the Lyoha suddenly struggled more and more. The faint light on the sword turned into an obvious white light, and the floor of the stage was buzzing and trembling. The huge Yuanyang jinqi in Li Yundong's body fought fiercely with the Lyoha's own magic power and jinqi. This jinqi was a combination of yin and yang, and it was extremely powerful. Li Yundong could resist the yang qi in it, but he couldn't stand the cold yin qi that was like gossamer and pricked him from time to time. While the two forces were in a stalemate, a drop of blood suddenly dripped from Li Yundong's neck where the blade had brushed past. The drop of blood fell on the hilt of the sword. Suddenly, Li Yundong heard a shrill sword cry from the Lyoha, and the resistance inside the sword instantly weakened a little. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly remembered what Su Chan had said to him after he had broken Wan Hongling's magic weapon with his bare hands. The blood of a virgin's Yuanyang is the most yang in the world, and it specializes in breaking all the yin qi in the world. Li Yundong immediately took a deep breath, loosened one hand, and wiped the wound on his neck with his finger. Then, he wiped the blade of the Lyoha with his bloody finger from top to bottom. Suddenly, the Lyoha let out a tragic cry, and the sword trembled violently. Then, Li Yundong felt that the soft and tenacious resistance inside had suddenly disappeared, and his Yuanyang power had broken into the blade of the Lyoha like a hot knife through butter. In the blink of an eye, the jinqi of the original owner of the sword had been completely broken by Li Yundong. The Liuhe in Li Yundong's hand suddenly quieted down, as gentle and docile as a virgin. With a thought, he pulled out the long sword with a swish. With a clang, the blood on the Liuhe quickly merged into it, leaving a looming character on the sword, and then disappeared in a flash. After being subdued by Li Yundong, the Liuhe let out a clear and loud sword cry again. The sword suddenly emitted a dazzling light, and the sword chi soared into the sky. It was so amazing that it shocked people's hearts. From the sudden attack of the threaded hairpin of soul traversal and the Liuhe to Zi Yuan dispersing the attack of the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, and then Li Yundong subdued the Liuhe, all of this happened in the blink of an eye. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan moved as fast as lightning. The actors on the stage were stunned, and the students below the stage were in an uproar. All the audience stood up in an uproar. They shouted in shock, F***ck, isn't this too exaggerated? What kind of stunt is this? There are always some children who ask me at night, Tang, why did you only update once today? Why didn't you update today? Tang replied speechlessly, boss, I update at least 2 times a day. This is unchangeable. From time to time, I will update 3 times. I know that some children like to save the table of contents of books and then read the updated chapters there. I do the same. But sometimes the display of the chapter table of contents is delayed, sometimes delayed by a few hours. I can't help it. I suggest that you spend some effort to register and then click on the collection button. In the future, you can see the latest updates on your bookshelf every day. My update time is around 14 o'clock at noon and 21 o'clock at night. If the 3 chapters are around 14 o'clock, 18 o'clock, and 21 o'clock respectively. Please, everyone, you can see the updates as soon as possible. You can also register an account and throw flowers to Tang. When the time comes, maybe Tang will release 1 or 2 more chapters. Why not? /om/ Chapter 235. Go to Watch Network. The sudden abnormality on the stage caused an uproar in the auditorium. Most of the people below the stage had not reacted yet. They thought that it was a deliberately arranged effect, so they were so shocked that they shouted and shouted. Watch net. A small number of students felt that something was wrong. They said loudly, how did Zhao Linger become a friend of the Sword Sage? Isn't this too ridiculous? Zhao Linger betrayed him. Damn, who wrote this script? So non-mainstream? Isn't this too postmodernist? How did the Sword Sage get together with Zhao Linger? Damn, isn't this Li Xiaoyao too tragic? This Sword Sage is too handsome. If I were Zhao Linger, I would also betray him. Damn, you fickle man. So you're a chrysanthemum fan? Some of the students below the stage made a ruckus, and the actors on the stage were all dumbfounded. They looked at each other, dumbfounded, especially the actors who were pretending to be dead on the ground. They couldn't help but want to get up and see what was going on. Those who had their heads facing away from the stage were fine. By opening one eye and closing the other, they could secretly see what had happened on the stage. Even the actors who had died on their backs could barely see a little if they squinted their eyes. However, some of the actors whose heads were facing the stage or lying on their stomachs were suffocating. One by one, they heard the clamor below the stage, and also heard the frightening movement just now, but they didn't know what had happened. They just had to hit their heads and couldn't move. They were so anxious that they were scratching their ears and cheeks. It was as if there were 25 little mice scratching their hearts. On the stage, a corpse near Li Xiaoyao couldn't help but pull Li Xiaoyao's trousers and whisper, "Hey, what's going on?" Zhong Xiugua, who was playing Li Xiaoyao, was already dumbfounded. His eyes almost fell out of their sockets. He stammered, I, how would I know? A few of the corpses, who were closer to Li Xiaoyao, also pretended to be dead on the stage and whispered to each other, could this be a last-minute addition? I don't think so. Then what's going on? How would I know? What should we do? How are we going to continue acting? You're asking me? Who am I supposed to ask? We're all dead now, big sister. Just lie down obediently. Watch the show, yes, watch the show. Fong Na, who was backstage, was also dumbfounded. She stared blankly at the stage. She had no idea why such a thing had suddenly happened. The trap makeup artist, who had been standing next to her, couldn't help but ask Fong Na in shock, Nana, when did you add scenes in private? Why didn't you inform us? Fong Na's face twitched. She forced a smile, but it looked worse than crying. I didn't add any scenes. The trap gasped. He looked at the stage in disbelief and asked, what happened just now? Cheng Cheng, who was under the stage, was also stunned and said, what the hell is going on? That's not how the show is arranged. Only Zhou Qin understood what had just happened. It was not the first time she had seen Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and the others use magic. Watch net. 7 KOM. She looked at Li Yundong and Zi Yuan with a complicated expression. Her eyes flickered, revealing a thoughtful look. Zhong Xiugua stood on the stage at a loss. He could clearly hear the shouts and laughter of some students below the stage. He also knew that he should think of a way at this time. Otherwise, if there was an awkward silence, it would become a joke. Zhong Xiugua pointed at Li Yundong and shouted, where on earth are you taking her? This sentence was purely an extra sentence he added on the spot. The implication was to remind Li Yundong and Zi Yuan, hey, you two bosses, we are still acting here. Don't mess around. But Li Yundong was at a critical moment of life and death, so how could he care about this? His eyes were fixed on the roof of the auditorium. The threaded hairpin of soul traversal was hidden in a place where the light could not reach, like a poisonous snake that would jump out at any time. Li Yundong lowered his voice and said to Zi Yuan, what the hell is going on? Zi Yuan also lowered her voice and whispered, I don't know, but just now. She was about to say something else when suddenly the threaded hairpin of soul traversal stabbed toward Li Yundong like lightning. Its speed was so fast that it seemed to tear the air apart. Zi Yuan immediately pushed out with one hand, trying to push Li Yundong away, but how could Li Yundong be willing to let a delicate woman protect him? He reached out and pulled Zi Yuan behind him. Then, with a loud shout, he shook the lyoha in his hand and drew a sword flower with his wrist. In an instant, the sword flower turned from 1 to 2, and then from 2 to 4, blocking the front of him tightly. The people below the stage saw a white light surging in front of Li Yundong, like a surging steel wall. In the white light, there was a flash of golden light, like a pervasive gossamer. As soon as the golden light and the white light came into contact, there was a dense clanging sound. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. At first, the crowd could still hear the gap, but soon they heard that the clanging sound was so dense that it seemed to be connected into a line, making it hard for them to breathe. The moment Li Yundong held Zi Yuan's hand, her whole body suddenly tightened. She had lived for so long, and this was the first time a man had touched her skin. Her cheeks flashed with shame. Just as she was about to lose her temper, she saw that Li Yundong had already fought with the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. It was the first time in her life that Zi Yuan had come into contact with a man. For a moment, her Taoist heart was lost, and her mood was agitated. She looked at Li Yundong's figure behind him and suddenly felt a little lost. In a trance, she seemed to see her master. In the past, he had used such a broad back to shelter her from the wind and rain. At this moment, Zi Yuan felt that the world around her seemed to have quietened down. There was only this familiar figure in her eyes, but this feeling only lasted for a moment. Soon, her master's figure drifted away and was replaced by Li Yundong's back. At this time, everyone in the auditorium was dumbfounded. They couldn't understand what was going on at all. They were just dazzled, as if they were watching a movie. After Li Yundong blocked a series of attacks from the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, the threaded hairpin of soul traversal suddenly retreated and instantly split into countless golden hairpins. These golden hairpins formed a fierce face, which glared at Li Yundong fiercely, and then quickly merged into one. In the blink of an eye, it fled toward an open window in the auditorium. Li Yundong shouted, "Where are you going?" He jumped and chased after it. Zi Yuan didn't stop her. She hesitated for a moment, then immediately chased after her. The two of them flashed and jumped out of the window with a few leaps. For a moment, the auditorium was silent. Everyone opened their mouths wide, as if they couldn't believe their eyes. Because what had happened before was so incredible and shocking, most of them still hadn't reacted. They still thought that it was an act and that some of the incredible things in it were stunts. They were in a daze for a while. Suddenly, a boy couldn't help shouting, "Damn it, Zhao Linger eloped with the sword sage." This shout was particularly abrupt in the silent auditorium, and it immediately caused the students in the auditorium to laugh wildly. Isn't this too funny? Zhao Linger actually eloped with the sword sage. Li Xiaoyao is too tragic, isn't he? His own woman actually eloped with an old man. Who wrote this play? It's so funny. It can win the Nobel Prize for parody. Talented, really talented. This play deeply satirizes the current social situation. As a rich, powerful big shot, the sword sage naturally has beautiful women willing to throw themselves into his arms. Even Zhao Linger is no exception. F***ck, brother, your analysis is so strong. I'll F***ck your lungs. On the stage, Zhong Xiuguo was alone, tears streaming down his face. I just want to act. Is it easy for me to play Li Xiaoyao? Who did I offend? He looked around and saw Feng Na and the others backstage, dumbfounded. The actors who had been killed on the stage were all lying on the ground and laughing. The heavenly bastard who had been in charge of the curtain didn't even know that it was over. He was standing alone on the stage, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. He was at a loss. Fortunately, Zhong Xiuguo had an idea. He suddenly let out a miserable scream and then shouted, "Linger, wait for me." As he said this, he ran backstage. The audience under the stage laughed so hard that some students who were bored shouted, "Hey, you're running in the wrong direction. The old and the young are a couple. Why do you want to join in the fun? Can a man also be a mistress? Damn it, the most tragic Li Xiaoyao in history is born." The people in the auditorium were laughing, but Li Yundong, who had just come out, didn't know anything. He had just learned to fly, so his speed was naturally not very fast. After chasing for a short distance, he lost sight of the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. Zi Yuan quickly came to his side and said in a deep voice, "Don't chase after him." As soon as she finished speaking, Wan Hongling also came out and said with a shocked face, "Sister Zi Yuan, what happened just now? What kind of magical item is that golden hairpin?" Zi Yuan said with a stern expression, "That's the threaded hairpin of soul traversal of Mo Ashi, the eldest disciple of the Fox Zen school." Wan Hongling couldn't help but say angrily, "Is the Fox Zen school tired of living? How dare they assassinate you?" Zi Yuan shook her head and looked at Li Yundong. "No, she didn't want to kill me, but Li Yundong." Li Yundong's face was as dark as water. "I also felt that the threaded hairpin of soul traversal was targeting me just now. But why did she want to kill me? After all, I have some relationship with the Fox Zen school. Why did she want to kill me?" Zi Yuan thought for a while and said, "I will investigate this matter, but compared to Mo Ashi and the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, I am more concerned about another thing." "What is it?" Li Yundong and Wan Hongling asked in unison. Zi Yuan's expression was surprisingly calm. She said, "Why did the Lioha suddenly recognize its master when the threaded hairpin of soul traversal appeared?" Li Yundong suddenly remembered that he had seen the Lioha jump out of its scabbard by itself and make a sword sound. He was shocked and said, You mean your second Shirbua was nearby at that time? Ruan Hongling was also shocked. Second Shirbua? She's here? /om/. Chapter 236. Go to watch net. Hearing Zi Yuan's words, Li Yundong picked up the lioha in his hand and glanced at it. He saw that the long sword was emitting a faint white light in the night. The body of the sword was clean and bright, giving off a sense of coldness. He couldn't bear to put it down. Go to watch net. Li Yundong pondered for a while and said, until now, I still don't know what your second Shirbua's name is. Zi Yuan said, my second Shirbua's surname is Yen Fong, and her Taoist name is Shinren Jiexia. This lioha used to be her personal sword. Just now, the lioha recognized its master, most likely because it sensed the aura of my second Shirbua, Yen Fong. Ruan Hongling couldn't help but say anxiously, since second Shirbua is nearby, why is she avoiding us? Doesn't she know that our Linggong sect is being severely suppressed now? If she had come back, we wouldn't be like this now. Zi Yuan glanced at her faintly and said, Hongling, it's better to rely on yourself than on others. It's the same even if it's second Shirbua. As she said this, she looked at the lioha in Li Yunyang's hand with a complicated look in her eyes and sighed slightly. When I first saw this lioha fall into your hands by accident, I felt that it was a coincidence. Now the spiritual energy of the owner of this lioha has been broken by you. What an anomaly. He put the lioha back into its sheath with a clang and handed it over. I had no choice just now. This sword wanted to kill me. I had to subdue it, so I had no choice but to do so. Zi Yuan didn't take it. She just shook her head and said, Buddhism talks about karma and opportunity, and so does our Taoism. If it's yours, even if I take it away now, it will still fall into your hands in the end. If it's not yours, even if you risk your life to snatch it, even if you pay with your life, it will never fall into your hands. Li Yundong thought of Wu Hao and LV Fengping and couldn't help but agree in his heart. However, he still handed the sword to Ruan Hongling and said with a smile, if this sword belonged to you, then I wouldn't be polite. But since it belongs to Yan Hua's family, if I take it like this, it will be embezzling other people's property. This is not good. Ruan Hongling, help me return it to Yan Hua. Ruan Hongling solemnly took the lioha with both hands and asked in confusion, this lioha is one of the most powerful magic weapons in our Zhengyi school. Don't you want it? Li Yundong chuckled and said, since Zi Yuan said that this sword is destined to be mine, even if I return it, it will return to my hands. Zi Yuan smiled and said, now that such a magical item has no owner, as long as you inject your Zhenqi into it, it will recognize you as its master. When the time comes, you just need to shout. Li Yundong spread his hands and said, look, now that I've returned the sword, if the lioha disappears, it won't be my problem anymore. Ruan Hongling couldn't help but laugh and scold, slippery fellow. Zi Yuan also smiled and said, I didn't expect you to be so cunning. Li Yundong said with an aggrieved expression, no way. I was so generous to return the sword, but you still scolded me. All right, give me the sword. I won't return it. As he spoke, he stretched out his hand toward Ruan Hongling. Ruan Hongling smiled and said, no way. I'm going to ask Yan Hua to lock this sword in the safe and make you cry to death if you can't get it. It was rare that Li Yundong didn't bicker with her. He just chuckled and didn't say anything else. He looked at Zi Yuan and asked, just now, this lioha wanted to kill me. I don't know if it was ordered by your second Shirbua or if it did it on its own. After pondering for a while, Zi Yuan said, unless you show strong hostility to my second Shirbua, it won't attack you directly. Watch net. Li Yundong recalled how the fan of 7 treasures had automatically protected him when a new student had challenged him. He nodded and said, you're right. But I have no enmity with Mo Ashi or your second martial uncle. Why would they attack me? Zi Yuan shook her head. This matter is very strange. Why did my second Sherbua's Lioha and Mo Ashi's threaded hairpin of soul traversing attack you at the same time? If this is a coincidence, then why would Mo Ashi want to kill you? Why does my second martial uncle want to kill you? If it's not a coincidence, then... Ruan Hongling had a firecracker temper. She immediately jumped up and said, "Isn't it easy to know the answer? Let's go to the Fox Zen school and we'll know the answer." Zi Yuan glared at her and said, "The situation is unclear now. You have no evidence and no reason. Why are you going there? If the other party is hostile, wouldn't you be walking right into a trap and sending yourself to death?" Li Yundong said in surprise, "No way. I have such a good relationship with Su Chan. She won't make things difficult for me, right?" Zi Yuan asked, "Then how do you explain that Mo Ashi wanted to kill you with the threaded hairpin of soul traversal?" The threaded hairpin of soul traversal is the most dangerous. It can hide the figure of the celestial device by the moonlight and shadows, and it is almost invisible to the naked eye when it is used. If I wasn't here tonight, I'm afraid you would have died. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Don't scare me." Zi Yuan patiently explained, "I'm not trying to scare you. Watch net. 7 KOM. There has always been internal strife in the Fox Zen school. Even the top master of the Fox Zen school, Ao Wushuang, was expelled. Although Su Chan is Ao Wushuang's disciple, it's hard to say whether the Fox Zen school will accept her or not. Therefore, it's almost impossible for the Fox Zen school to treat you differently for Su Chan's sake." Li Yundong suddenly thought of something and was shocked. The girl won't be implicated, will she? The people of the Fox Zen school won't do anything to her, will they? Zi Yuan comforted him and said, "Ao Wushuang has left the Fox Zen school for 10 years. I think she has nothing to do with the Fox Zen school. I don't think the Fox Zen school will make trouble for Su Chan." Li Yundong was a little relieved, but when he thought of Su Chan, he couldn't wait to go through the heavenly tribulation immediately and find his beloved little girl. Zi Yuan seemed to have seen through his thoughts and said, "Don't worry. The most important thing now is to improve your Shintong and Dharma power as soon as possible. The heavenly tribulation is imminent. Don't think too much about it. I will deal with this matter." After that, Zi Yuan turned to look at Wan Hongling. "Hongling, go back to the mountain and take my golden invitation to the Fox Zen school to visit them. See how they react. By the way, take the souls of those 2 people back. I will deal with them when I return to the mountain." Ruan Hongling responded with a sigh. Her figure turned into a blue light and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Not long after, she flew back and handed the Lioha to Zi Yuan. "Sister Zi Yuan, help me return it to Yanhua." After that, she turned into a beam of green light and left. Li Yundong watched from the side and asked curiously, "Why can you all turn into a beam of green light and fly away? And at such a fast speed?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "When you reach the Yuanying phase and cultivate your Yin spirit or Yang spirit, you will be able to do so." Li Yundong had been studying hard these days. Although he had been diligent, it was inevitable that there were some questions he didn't know. He took the opportunity to ask, "What is a Yin spirit? What exactly is a Yang spirit? How should I cultivate?" Although Zi Yuan was about the same age as Li Yundong, she had been cultivating since she was a child. She had more than 10 years of cultivation experience than Li Yundong, so she naturally knew much more. She explained with a smile, "In the 11th year of Chenyu in the southern Song dynasty, Xie Xiandao, Lin Buqian, Yi Gushi, Peng Helen, and others, jointly wrote the quotations of Immortal Haiqiong Bai. The first volume of this book recorded, rebirth, there is a body outside the body. When it is gathered, it takes shape. When it is scattered, it becomes qi. This is the Yang spirit. One thought is clear and the soul consciousness has not dispersed. It is like a dream or a shadow. It is similar to a ghost. This is the Yin spirit." Li Yundong suddenly understood. "I understand. The Yin spirit is more like a soul that can go out of the body, while the yang spirit is like another avatar of oneself. Zi Yuan nodded. You can understand it that way. Li Yundong asked again, then why can I turn into a blue light and fly after cultivating the yin spirit or the yang spirit? Zi Yuan explained, what you saw just now was not a blue light, but the effect of the yin spirit covering the body and helping it fly. As for the specific mystery of the cultivation method, you will be able to understand it when you cultivate your own yin spirit. Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, then how should I cultivate? Zi Yuan laughed. You are really greedy. You have just embarked on the cultivation of Shintong and you want to form a nascent soul and refine your spirit. Wait until you pass the heavenly tribulation. Li Yundong also laughed. He suddenly thought of something and said with a wry smile, oh no, I was only concerned about saving my life just now. I actually fought on the stage and even fought with the threaded hairpin of soul traversal. This is going to be fun. I'm afraid that people will look at us as aliens in the future. Zi Yuan couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. She rubbed her temples and said with a wry smile, this is indeed a problem, but I won't let it get worse. Don't worry. As for the others, let them say what they want. She suddenly smiled sarcastically and said, in this world, everyone either listens blindly or doesn't believe anything, only believes in themselves. They won't believe in these incomprehensible things. Didn't you also look shocked and incredulous when you heard about the Taoist methods of cultivation? Li Yundong smiled embarrassedly and said, I used to be very stupid and naive. Zi Yuan glanced at Li Yundong and couldn't help but taunt, I think you are very dirty and violent, aren't you? Li Yundong suddenly widened his eyes and looked at Zi Yuan with shock and admiration. He cupped his hands and said, it turns out that Jinren Zi Yuan also knows Brother Guanxi. Sorry for my disrespect. Brother Guanxi is so famous that even Jinren Zi Yuan, the eldest Shiji of the Linggong sect of the Juni school, also knows his name. It seems that Brother Guanxi can smile in the underworld. It was rare for Zi Yuan's Taoist heart to be shaken several times tonight, so at this time, she made a slip of the tongue. She couldn't help but glare at Li Yundong angrily and say angrily, it's hard for me not to know such a scandal. Li Yundong didn't expect that Zi Yuan, who seemed to be otherworldly, would know about this gossip. For a moment, he was curious and excited and asked, hey, what else do you know? Do you know Aoi? What about Ozawa? What about Sakura? What about Yoshizawa? Although Zi Yuan didn't know who the people Li Yundong was talking about were, she could tell from his eyes and smile that he was definitely not a decent person. She couldn't help blushing and glaring at Li Yundong angrily. She didn't say much, lest she made more mistakes, and walked away quickly. Li Yundong chased after her and laughed. Hey, don't go. It's also good to exchange experiences. Even if you don't exchange experiences, it's also good to have fun. At this time, Li Yundong was still dressed as a sword sage, and Zi Yuan was still dressed as Zhao Linger. The two of them walked quickly on the campus, and the other walked quickly. Their appearance was really ridiculous and funny, attracting the attention of the students in the school. At this time, the welcome party had also come to an end. It was time for the students to pour out of the auditorium and disperse. For a moment, the students widened their eyes and shouted, damn, did the sword sage take liberties with Zhao Linger? What's wrong? Didn't Zhao Linger elope with the sword sage? Hey, did the young couple have a quarrel? Zi Yuan was angry in her heart. She was the dignified Shiji of the Linggong sect of the Juni school. How could she be molested like this? It was really hateful. Zi Yuan wished she could stamp her feet and turn into a blue light to leave here, but there were people everywhere. If she flew away, it would be a big joke. Bursts of laughter around her penetrated Zi Yuan's ears. Finally, she couldn't help but turn around abruptly. The expression on her face was that she wanted to strangle Li Yundong, the frivolous and rude bastard, to death. Li Yundong saw that her face was full of anger and her eyes were full of fire. He stopped for a moment and didn't dare to make fun of her anymore. He smiled awkwardly and said, "Don't be angry, it's just a joke." Just as Zi Yuan was about to speak, she suddenly heard a sneer and a mocking voice coming from not far away. "Ha, you actually came. What a rare guest." Li Yundong also heard this sentence. He turned his head in the direction of the voice and saw a group of people gathered at the entrance of the auditorium. Ding Nan sneered and looked down at Zhou Qin. "Oh, isn't this Miss Zhou Qin of our Tiannan University?" When Ding Nan and Zhou Qin's eyes met, the two girls' eyes suddenly burst into sparks and smoke filled the air. Group 1, 2, 3, and 4 are full. Please add Group 5, 126359645/OM/45278941954. Chapter 237. Go to watch net. During the days when Zhou Qin had been away from Tiannan University, Ding Nan had quickly used her influence to gather a group of like-minded girls. At this time, when she walked out of the auditorium, she saw Zhou Qin sitting in a wheelchair. New hatred and old hatred suddenly erupted in her heart, and she couldn't help but step forward to ridicule her. Go to watch net. 7 KOM 113 Shui 4 net. Seeing Ding Nan's provocation, Zhou Qin sneered and said, "Hey, isn't this Ding Nan?" She glanced at the group of girls standing behind Ding Nan and said with a smile, "What's wrong? I haven't seen you for some time. Have you joined a club?" Ding Nan saw Zhou Qin sitting in a wheelchair and knew that the power she had relied on in the past had been destroyed, but she was still arrogant. She couldn't help but sneer and say, "I haven't seen you for more than 2 months. You've changed a lot, haven't you? But you're still sharp-tongued." When Zhou Qin heard Ding Nan's sarcasm that she was now a cripple in a wheelchair, her face suddenly darkened and she stopped bickering with her. Seeing that Zhou Qin was silent, Ding Nan thought that she had backed down. She had known Zhou Qin for a long time and knew that Zhou Qin had a strong personality. She liked to fight head-on and would never compromise. At this time, as soon as she flinched, Ding Nan couldn't help but feel proud and emotional. She sneered and said, "Zhou Qin, as the saying goes, the wheel of fortune turns. Weren't you very proud of yourself before? Why are you suddenly silent today?" Ding Nan clapped her hands and said to herself, "Ah, I know. You must be afraid." Ding Nan snorted and said with a sneer, "What are you afraid of? Is it because you no longer have the power to order me or threaten me? Is it because you realize that you are no longer the proud princess you used to be?" As she said this, Ding Nan raised her head and laughed. All the resentment she had accumulated in the past seemed to pour out at this moment. Zhou Qin, you have such a day. When you used to order me around, did you ever think that you would end up like this?" Ding Nan roared with a fierce look on her face. Cheng, who was pushing the wheelchair behind her, couldn't stand it anymore. She shouted, "Ding Nan, don't go too far." Ding Nan laughed out loud. "Am I going too far?" She pointed at Zhou Qin and shouted angrily, "She forced me to jump down from the roof. Isn't she going too far? She has used her power to humiliate me over and over again. Isn't she going overboard?" Zhou Qin looked at Ding Nan and said with a sneer, "Ding Nan, some roads are chosen by you. You can't blame others." Ding Nan suddenly bent down and gripped the armrests of the wheelchair tightly. She stared at Zhou Qin and said, "Yes, I chose this path myself. But do I have a choice? Humph, in the past, you relied on your wealth and power to trample on me, but now? Ha, the heavens really have eyes." Ding Nan suddenly straightened up and shouted to the surrounding students, "Look, this is the once arrogant Miss Zhou Qin. She can no longer be as arrogant and domineering as she used to be. Let's take revenge on her enemies and take revenge on her enemies. Ha ha ha." Although Zhou Qin had been arrogant in the past, she had always kept a low profile in school and had never had any grudges with anyone. In particular, she was extremely beautiful. At this time, she was sitting in a wheelchair, which made people feel sorry for her. Who would come to make trouble for her? Ching Ching sneered and said, "Ding Nan, have you had enough? Do you think everyone is like you?" Ding Nan looked at her with hatred, gritted her teeth, and said, "Ching Ching, this is none of your business. Get out of my way." Ching Ching shouted angrily, "Zhou Qin is my friend. Her business is my business." Ding Nan laughed and said, "I'm dying of laughter. Zhou Qin has no power or influence now. Why are you here to help her? Do you think that if you help her like this, she will be grateful to you and you will get any benefits?" Ching Ching was so angry that her face turned pale. She was about to yell at her, but Zhou Qin suddenly raised her hand and motioned for her not to speak. Ching Ching snorted coldly and glared at Ding Nan fiercely. Go to the internet. Zhou Qin was a person who was used to great storms. When her father had been punished, she had been forced to confess in secret for nearly 2 months, but she had not wavered at all. How could she give in at this time? Zhou Qin looked at Ding Nan meaningfully. She sneered and said, "Ding Nan, you're right. I am indeed no longer who I used to be. It doesn't matter if a phoenix is inferior to a chicken or a tiger has fallen to the ground. But let me tell you, no matter what I become, a chicken will always be a chicken. It will never fly up the branch and become a phoenix." When Ding Nan heard Zhou Qin calling her a chicken in a roundabout way, she suddenly became furious and scolded with an ugly face, "What good do you think you are? You are just a cripple, a cripple. What are you so proud of?" Li Yundong had never understood the grudge between Ding Nan and Zhou Qin, so he had not intervened just now. But when he heard this, he finally couldn't help it and shouted angrily, "Ding Nan, then what are you?" Li Yundong's shout immediately attracted everyone's attention. As soon as Ding Nan saw Li Yundong, she was shocked and became discouraged. She stammered, "Li Yundong? What are you doing here?" Li Yundong said angrily, "What am I doing? What are you doing?" Ding Nan really didn't want to have a conflict with Li Yundong. She loved this boy, so in the end, she had become enemies with Zhou Qin. But now that she was riding a tiger, she had no choice but to bite the bullet and say, "This is between me and Zhou Qin. Don't interfere." Li Yundong sneered and said, "I don't want to interfere either. But what did you say just now? Zhou Qin is already like this. Do you still want to kill her? You don't even have a trace of Buddha's heart. Are you still human? Look at you now. What's the difference between you and a vicious shrew?" Ding Nan looked at Li Yundong in shock. She felt as if someone had pinched her heart hard. She cried out involuntarily, "You don't know. She's pretending. She's lying to you. I know her best. She's the best at pretending and hypocrisy. She..." Li Yundong shouted angrily, "Enough. Do some good for yourself." After that, Li Yundong pointed with his finger and said, "Get out of here. I don't want to see you." Ding Nan's eyes were filled with tears. She hissed, "You, how could you do this to me?" Li Yundong's eyes widened and he was furious. "Get out of here." This angry shout tore Ding Nan's heart apart. She covered her face with her hands, sobbed, and rushed out of the crowd. Her figure quickly disappeared into the night. Go to Kanban. 7 K.O.M. Ching Ching looked at her back and spat on the ground. What kind of person is she? Just because she's a snob, does she think everyone in the world is a snob? Li Yundong took her hand and pushed Zhou Qin's wheelchair over. He comforted her and said, "Don't think too much. It was my fault just now. I shouldn't have left you alone." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "It's nothing." She looked up at Li Yundong and said, "I'm a little tired. Can you take me back?" Li Yundong nodded with a smile. He said goodbye to Ziyuan, then said goodbye to Ching Ching. and pushed Zhou Qin out of the school. Along the way, Li Yundong could hear the students pointing at him and Zhou Qin, who was sitting in a wheelchair. Who is this? So beautiful. Is she Li Yundong's girlfriend? I don't know. I think so. What a pity. Why is she in a wheelchair? Alas, yes. Li Yundong frowned when he heard this. He couldn't wait to cure Zhou Qin's foot immediately. He was about to speak to Zhou Qin and comfort her when he suddenly saw her sigh softly. Zhou Qin whispered, Li Yundong. Li Yundong bent down slightly and said, Zhou Qin hesitated for a moment and asked, was I really a little too much in the past? Li Yundong was silent for a moment. He sighed and said, everyone has their own good fortune. Others only see that you were born into a better family than them, so they are jealous, but they don't see the pain and difficulties behind it. This can be considered a siege, right? Speaking of this, Li Yundong's tone suddenly changed and his voice became cold. But I absolutely can't stand it when Ding Nan humiliates others in public like this. Killing people is just a matter of nodding your head to the ground. You are already like this, but she still humiliates you like this. What is this? If it weren't for the fact that she is a girl, I would have slapped her in the face long ago. Forget it. I was wrong in the past. As she said this, Zhou Qin sighed. She looked up at Li Yundong with a gentle smile on her face, as if with this boy standing in front of her, she felt quiet and peaceful, happy and satisfied. Thank you for standing up for me today. Li Yundong looked at the sincere smile on Zhou Qin's face. He didn't know why, but he suddenly felt very uncomfortable. He sighed and said, don't say such things. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I would have been a prisoner now. You have done me a great favor. Zhou Qin's face suddenly changed, and she said in a trembling voice, do you think you want to repay my kindness? That's why you are treating me like this? Li Yundong was stunned. He hadn't expected that Zhou Qin's expression would change so suddenly. In the blink of an eye, the gentle breeze had turned into a storm. Of course not. You are my friend. Li Yundong looked at Zhou Qin and said. Zhou Qin's eyes were fixed on Li Yundong's eyes. After a long time, she softened her expression and said softly, I'm sorry. I was too sensitive. Let's go back. Li Yundong smiled and nodded. One of them was standing and pushing the wheelchair, while the other was sitting in the wheelchair. For a moment, their shadows were stretched out under the streetlights of the campus. Ding Nan, who had been scolded by Li Yundong and had run away, cried all the way. She wandered blindly on the road like a headless fly. She was like a walking corpse that had lost her soul. She didn't know how far she had walked. When she came to her senses, she found herself at the end of a strange street. It was already late at night, and there were few pedestrians on the road. She was the only one standing on the side of the road, alone. Ding Nan wiped away her tears. She was at a loss about what to do. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept past her, and then her whole body flew up. When she landed again, she was already in a dark corner of the alley dozens of meters away. An old man with white hair and a ruddy face was holding Ding Nan's neck with one hand. He couldn't help looking her up and down, and said in surprise, not bad, you are indeed a good tripod furnace. Good disciple, you have picked so many tripod furnaces these days. This one is good, right? As he spoke, a woman suddenly appeared beside him. She had a coquettish face and a frivolous look in her eyes. She looked Ding Nan up and down, then suddenly laughed and said, not bad, you are indeed a good tripod furnace. What's more, you are a virgin tripod furnace. Good, good, good. She said good 3 times in a row, but Ding Nan was frightened by them. She struggled and shouted, what are you doing? The woman smiled and said, stop struggling. No one will come to save you. After I occupy your body, you will be completely obedient. Of course, in a moment, your soul will belong to me, and your good virgin body. It's rare to see such a beautiful virgin. With that, the woman rushed toward Ding Nan and jumped into her body in the blink of an eye. Ding Nan looked frightened and struggled frantically. The woman's laughter came to her mind. By the way, you must remember my name. My name is LV Fengping, /OM/45278941954. Chapter 238. Go to watch net. Since Li Yundong had destroyed LV Fengping's body and Yin's spirit had left her body, she had been crying and cursing Li Yundong all the way. After a long time, she returned to Zheng Yuan, the leader of the Yin Yang sect in Mount Wuhua. Go to watch net. When Zheng Yuan heard that his adopted son, Wu Hao, had been killed by a young boy, and that his beloved disciple, LV Fengping, had been destroyed, he felt that they had formed an irreconcilable feud. Zheng Yuan was furious and wanted to go down the mountain to take revenge, but it was not easy to find a person named Li Yundong in this world. There were so many people with the same name and surname. When he found this guy named Li Yundong and found Tiannan City, he was surprised to find that there were people fighting in Tiannan City. When he followed his magic power to find her, he was surprised to find Ding Nan, a good human tripod furnace. Most importantly, this girl was not only a virgin Yuanine human tripod furnace, but also had lost her soul. Her spiritual power was very weak, which was very suitable for LV Fengping to be reborn. These days, LV Fengping had been looking for Li Yundong, her big enemy, while looking for a good furnace. She had been a coquettish beauty when she was alive, so she naturally refused to make do with it casually. No matter how she looked, she was not satisfied. It was not that her appearance was not good enough, but that her physical talent was not good enough. Tonight, she suddenly found Ding Nan, a good furnace. For a moment, she was so excited that she even forgot to kill Ding Nan. She immediately got into Ding Nan's body, wanting to devour her soul and occupy this body. The moment LV Fengping got into her body, Ding Nan suddenly shuddered, and all the incredible things she had seen in Li Yundong's body flashed through her mind. Why was this boy able to catch me from the 5th floor? Why was this boy able to dodge bullets? At this moment, Ding Nan seemed to understand everything in an instant. It turns out that Li Yundong is not an ordinary person, just like these two people. Ding Nan's divine sense and soul were in a daze in her spirit space. However, LV Fengping was like a tree vine tightly wrapped around her body, getting tighter and tighter. Countless vines pierced into her body from every orifice. LV Fengping smiled proudly and excitedly. By the way, don't struggle. Be good and listen to me. It won't hurt. Just think of it as a nap. Ding Nan was shocked. She looked at LV Fengping, who was getting tighter and tighter in the spirit space, and suddenly said angrily, "Who are you? What do you want?" LV Fengping giggled and said, "You're so forgetful. Didn't I just tell you my name? How could he have forgotten so quickly? But it doesn't matter, you won't know anything in a while. Your beautiful body will belong to me, and your soul will also belong to me." Ding Nan was shocked. She wants to kill me? Thinking of this, Ding Nan couldn't help but feel resentment and hatred. In the past, Zhou Qin bullied me, and even Li Yundong helped her. Now, even you want to bully me? How could it be so easy? She couldn't help but focus all her resentment on LV Fengping. With a roar, she wrestled with LV Fengping in her spirit space. Watch net. It wasn't easy to occupy a living person's body, especially when the person was still alive and kicking. It was even more difficult. Either the Yin spirit of the person being possessed was so powerful that it was much stronger than that of the person being possessed, and when it invaded the other person's spirit space, it could instantly wipe out the other person's divine sense and soul. Otherwise, even if it invaded the other person's body, it was possible to be wiped out by the other person. Or, the living person could be controlled with drugs, so that their divine sense and soul would be weakened to the brink of death, and then their body could be invaded. At first, LV Fengping saw that Ding Nan had been in a trance along the way, so she thought that this woman's soul and will must be weak and easy to bully, so she got into Ding Nan's body without any preparation. But she had underestimated Ding Nan. At this time, ordinary girls might have been crying and begging for mercy, but Ding Nan was not an ordinary girl. In order to achieve her goal, she even dared to take the initiative to attack Zhou Qin. Seeing that Ding Nan suddenly resisted violently, LV Fengping couldn't help being shocked. She threatened in a fierce voice, "Do you think you can be stronger than me? Why are you resisting? Resistance will only increase your pain. It's futile. Don't resist." Ding Nan gritted her teeth and said, "Even if I'm no match for you, don't think you'll have an easy time. I'd rather die with you." LV Fengping was furious. With a loud roar, she began to wrestle with Ding Nan in her spirit space. But after all, this spirit space was Ding Nan's home field. Although her divine sense was strong and she was a cultivator, the power of her Yin spirit had been weakened a lot after so many days without her body to rely on. Moreover, she was a guest army after all. Fighting with Ding Nan in Ding Nan's body, she had suffered a great loss. In addition, Ding Nan's tenacious resistance made it impossible for her to win quickly. She was dragged into a battle of attrition, and the power of her Yin spirit was constantly weakening. Watch net. Taking advantage of her home field advantage, Ding Nan fought more and more bravely. Gradually, she even took the power of LV Fengping's Yin spirit as her own. The chaotic and dark spirit space around them began to brighten, and there seemed to be dazzling sunlight shining above their heads. LV Fengping's Yin spirit became weaker and weaker. In the end, there was only a thin layer of shadow left. She looked at Ding Nan, who was getting stronger and stronger, in fear and despair, and said in a hoarse voice, "How is this possible? How can your divine sense be so strong? It's impossible." Ding Nan lost her temper. It was the first time in her life that she had won so happily. Ding Nan laughed, stretched out her hand, and grabbed LV Fengping's neck with one hand. She said ferociously, "If you want to kill me, then I'll kill you. Anyone who goes against me will pay the price." As she spoke, she squeezed hard. It was a pity that LV Fengping went for wool and came home shorn. She wanted to devour Ding Nan's soul and occupy her body, but she didn't expect that in the end, her Yin spirit would be devoured by Ding Nan. With a roar, her Yin spirit exploded in an instant, turning into countless cyan gossamer threads. After floating around in the spirit space for a while, they slowly and automatically began to surge toward Ding Nan's body. As these cyan threads were merged with Ding Nan's soul, she peeped into LV Fengping's memory bit by bit. She suddenly saw a world she had never seen before open to her. The door was dark, mysterious and majestic, which made her excited and fanatical. Although Zheng Yuan was the leader of the Yin-Yang sect, it was extremely difficult to predict what was going on in Ding Nan's body. Even the gods didn't know what was going on in Ding Nan's body. Moreover, he had extremely strong confidence in his beloved disciple. Pinger can't defeat the soul of this lost woman? Are you kidding me? It's impossible. Zheng Yuan had been observing Ding Nan's body with narrowed eyes. He saw that Ding Nan's face had changed from shock and fear at first to anger and struggle, and then slowly to pride and ecstasy. He thought that LV Fengping had taken control of the body, so he stroked his white beard proudly and said with a smile, "How do you feel, Pinger?" Ding Nan slowly opened her eyes and took a deep look at the powerful cultivator in front of her. She resisted the urge to kill the old man. She stared at Zheng Yuanliang for a long time, and the look in her eyes changed. Seeing her like this, Zheng Yuan didn't doubt her. He just asked in a slightly strange tone, "What's wrong? Could it be that you're not used to being a new cauldron?" Ding Nan suddenly smiled strangely. She giggled and said meaningfully, "No, I'm very good. I've never felt so good. Master." Zheng Yuan chuckled and reached out to put his hand on Ding Nan's wrist. "You've just occupied a new cauldron, so it's more important for you to cultivate again. There's no hurry to take revenge. Anyway, the monk can run away, but the temple can't. How about we go back first? As soon as Ding Nan's wrist was touched by him, she suddenly got goosebumps, but she remained calm. She just glanced at Jing Yuan coldly and quickly and said with a smile, "I'll listen to you, master." Jing Yuan tilted his head and looked at Ding Nan, stroking his beard. He grinned and said, "Hey, you've changed your body. I always feel strange." Ding Nan smiled and said, "You'll slowly get used to it in the future, master." Jing Yuan laughed and waved his hand. "Then let's go back to the mountain first." After that, he turned into a green light with Ding Nan and disappeared in an instant. After sending Zhou Qin back to the hospital, Li Yundong returned home. As soon as he entered the house, he saw that it was dark, and the empty living room was cold and silent, which made him a little uncomfortable. He had already adapted to the days when there were people in the house. As soon as he entered the door, there was warm light, hot food, and hot tea. Or it could be said that he had gradually adapted to the appearance of Zi Yuan in his life. When Li Yundong entered the door, he didn't see Zi Yuan. He couldn't help but mutter in his heart, "Where has this fairy sister gone? Why haven't I seen her today?" Li Yundong searched around the house, but he didn't see Zi Yuan. He put down the fan of 7 treasures, walked to the balcony, and looked in the direction of Zi Yuan's room. He saw a faint light coming from the room connected to the balcony. Seeing that it was late at night, Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he flew over. Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling often acted as uninvited guests and jumped onto the balcony of his house without saying hello. However, this was the first time that Li Yundong had set foot in Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling's residence. As soon as he landed, Li Yundong saw that the French windows of the balcony were separated by a thick layer of bright yellow curtains, and a soft light shone through the curtains. Li Yundong gently stretched out his hand and pushed the French windows of the balcony, only to see that they were open. The French windows were not locked. Li Yundong curiously pushed open the screen window and took a look. He saw that there was only one wall lamp in the living room, and the color was very warm. Although the room was complete with appliances and furniture, it looked very modern. However, there was an incense burner on the coffee table in the living room. There were 3 sandalwood incense sticks in the incense burner. The sandalwood incense sticks emitted bursts of green smoke, looking antique in this modern decorated room. Li Yundong looked around the living room. He saw a ray of light shining in the bedroom, so he walked over curiously. He walked to the door and looked into the room, only to see a slim woman in a white dress and a transparent gauze. She was sitting at a desk with her back to him. Li Yundong knew that this woman was Zi Yuan just by looking at her back. Under the soft light, Zi Yuan's back looked hazy and gentle, ethereal and elegant. There were brushes, ink, paper, and inkstones in front of her. One of her slender hands was holding a brush, and her snow-white wrist was as smooth and translucent as jade under the light. For a moment, Li Yundong was stunned. It was as if he had seen the fairy flying out of the Dunhuang frescoes. A beautiful woman was standing in front of him, gently grinding the ink, slowly lifting the brush, and elegantly waving the brush. Li Yundong held his breath. He didn't even dare to disturb Zi Yuan, for fear that if he made a little louder, he would destroy this beautiful and serene scene. He walked over gently and looked over Zi Yuan's shoulder to see the words she had written in front of her. There was a stack of xian paper on the desk. Zi Yuan's wrist gently turned, and the tip of the brush quickly wrote a 7-rhythm poem on the xian paper. Once the Jin Dan appears, the fate of the world is set, and the thunder first sounds to see the truth. The spirit mirror is easy to break, and the mortal tribulation is difficult to break with a sword. Yunhai sits and looks at old Yunhai, and talks about the wind and dust in front of the stone. Chang'e has no regrets in stealing elixirs. Why should Hongyang envy Zhangsheng? After Zi Yuan picked up the brush and finished writing, she stared blankly at the beautiful handwriting. She was in a daze until the brush she was holding dripped a drop of ink on the rice paper and dyed a black ink spot. She woke up with a start. After thinking for a while, she wrote another name on the ink spot, Wang Yuanshan. After a while, she frowned slightly, hesitated for a while, and wrote another name next to Wang Yuanshan, Li Yundong. After Zi Yuan finished writing, she slowly put the pen on the pen holder and sighed softly. Her eyes were blurred and blank as she looked at the qilu and the two names in front of the table. For a moment, she couldn't help but be fascinated. Chapter 239. Go to watch net. Li Yundong stood behind Zi Yuan and looked at the poem. Although he felt strange in his heart, he vaguely felt that the poem was talking about him. Go to watch net. 7 K.O.M. Especially the first sentence, once Jin Dan appears, the fate of the world will be determined, made him feel even more strange. It was as if at this time, Li Yundong seemed to have some understanding of what Wan Hongling had said to Zi Yuan in the past. After an unknown period of time, Li Yundong coughed softly. Zi Yuan's body suddenly tightened, and she instantly crumpled the paper in front of her. She suddenly turned around and shouted in a low voice, "Who is it?" She turned around, holding the paper ball in one hand, and the other hand was surrounded by a faint cyan light. It seemed that in the next second, an extremely powerful magic would be released and give people a thunderous blow. When Zi Yuan saw Li Yundong, she was stunned. "Why are you here? Why are you here?" Li Yundong coughed dryly and didn't answer. "Why? You've come to my house so many times. Can't I come to your place once?" Zi Yuan relaxed her nerves, and the faint cyan light in her hand slowly disappeared. However, her other hand subconsciously clenched the paper ball in her hand. Her ears were slightly red, and she looked a little embarrassed, but she pretended that nothing had happened and asked, "How long have you been here?" Li Yundong wanted to ask her what the poem meant, but seeing her like this, he was too embarrassed to ask again. He said, "I just came here for a while." Zi Yuan suddenly breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. She quietly hid the paper ball in her hand behind her, pretending to be nonchalant, and asked lightly, "What can I do for you?" Li Yundong had nothing to do at first. He had just come over out of curiosity, but he hadn't expected to see the scene just now. He thought for a moment and casually made up a reason. "Nothing, I just thought of how I subdued the Lyoha tonight and had some questions in my heart." Go to watch net. When it came to cultivation, Zi Yuan gradually regained her composure. She stood up and said, "What questions?" Li Yundong said, "When I subdued the Lyoha, I used my blood because I remember Su Chan once told me that my boy Yuanyang blood was specialized in breaking all the yin qi in the world." Zi Yuan nodded and said, "Yes." Li Yundong asked again, "That virgin primordial yin blood should be able to destroy all the yang qi in the world, right?" Zi Yuan suddenly smiled faintly. She shook her head and said, "That's not necessarily true. Yin and yang reinforce and counteract each other. The so-called primordial yang blood is specialized in breaking all the yin qi in the world, but it also depends on the specific situation. Your primordial yang blood itself contains a powerful gold core yuan qi, plus your inner core is vigorous and condensed, so your primordial yang blood can break almost all the yin qi in the world. However, if the opponent's yin qi is much stronger than yours, then you won't be able to break through it. This principle is like the relationship between water and fire. Water can put out a fire, but how can a basin of water extinguish a house fire?" After Zi Yuan finished explaining, she looked at Li Yundong in confusion and asked, "Why did you suddenly ask this question?" Li Yundong said, "Although it was a little thrilling when I subdued the Lyoha tonight, the process was much smoother than I had imagined. Almost as soon as my boy Yuanyang blood touched the Lyoha, it was immediately subdued and used by me. So I was thinking that if one day I use the fan of 7 treasures to fight with someone, and the other party uses a powerful virgin primordial yin blood to break the yang qi I left in the fan, wouldn't my fan of 7 treasures be taken away? After hearing this, Zi Yuan looked appreciative. She said, the fact that you can think of this shows that you are already a qualified cultivator. That's right. Yin and yang and the 5 elements of heaven and earth reinforce and counteract each other. If you can know the cultivation attribute of the other party and use it to target it, you will get twice the result with half the effort. This is the reason why you subdued the Lyoha. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. It is also because of this that many cultivators set their personal magical artifacts with several different attributes, making it impossible for you to use one method to instantly subdue the magical artifact. As she spoke, Zi Yuan turned her wrist and took out a purple ribbon that was 3 fingers wide from her sleeve. She handed one end of the ribbon to Li Yundong and said with a smile, "Try to subdue this magical item of mine." Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan in surprise. "Aren't you afraid that I'll take your magical item away?" Zi Yuan smiled slightly. "If you really have such magical power, then I should worship you as my master." Li Yundong laughed, and there was a faint eagerness in his eyes. He grabbed a corner of the ribbon with his fingers and felt that it was smooth and soft, almost slippery. Li Yundong tried to inject his Yuanyang Junqi into the ribbon, but as soon as he did so, he felt a strong yin qi bounce back. This yin qi was long and soft, like a vast sea. No matter how Li Yundong mobilized his Yuanyang Junqi to attack, it could easily resolve his fierce attack. Li Yundong's heart trembled. He stopped for a moment, then suddenly mobilized all the Yuanyang Junqi in his body and attacked with all his strength. This attack was ferocious, as if a towering mountain had fallen into the sea, setting off monstrous waves. Li Yundong was overjoyed when he saw that the yin qi was finally showing signs of defeat. He thought that he was about to win against Zi Yuan's personal magical item. Just as he was about to take advantage of the victory to pursue it, he suddenly felt a stream of yang qi and an unknown force suddenly jump out of the magical item. This yang qi was not strong, but it always restrained Li Yundong's power, making him unable to concentrate on attacking the yin qi. Another strange force appeared to be strong and hard, like a machete, but also like a qingfeng sword. It attacked Li Yundong's Yuanyang Junqi from the side again and again. Li Yundong's Yuanyang Junqi and the Yuanyang Junqi in this ribbon restrained each other. At this time, when he had the upper hand, he was naturally unstoppable. However, when faced with this strange force and a trace of Yuanyang Junqi, he could not gain an advantage at all. After a few rounds, Li Yundong went from winning to being in a stalemate, and then he was beaten by the 3 forces. Just as she was about to be devoured by the backlash, Zi Yuan suddenly pulled back the ribbon in his hand and said with a smile, "How is it?" Li Yundong broke out in a cold sweat and said with lingering fear, "What's going on?" "I can understand that there is yang qi in it. After all, for a cultivator like you, the supreme yin qi produces the supreme yang qi. Yin and yang are endless, which is very normal. But where did the other force come from? What kind of power is this?" Zi Yuan smiled and waved at Li Yundong. "Come over and take a look." As she said this, she touched the ribbon with her finger. Li Yundong leaned over to take a look and saw that the ribbon was glowing with a golden light. In this golden light, a row of mysterious and strange runes appeared faintly on the ribbon. Li Yundong asked in confusion, "What is this?" Zi Yuan looked at the ribbon lovingly and sighed. She gently brushed her fingers over the runes and said softly, "This is the rune that my master branded with gold sand for me, which is the strange force that you felt just now. This force is the power of the metal attribute of the 5 elements. It is used to prevent someone from breaking my magical item by targeting the opposite attribute." Li Yunyang suddenly understood and said, "I see. Your magical item has the yin attribute, the yang attribute, and the metal attribute. The opponent can restrain your supreme yin qi, but he can't restrain your supreme yang qi. Even if he can restrain both, he will be defeated by your metal attribute, which is a hidden secret weapon." Zi Yuan smiled and nodded. "That's right. Fighting is like using troops. There is a saying in Sun Tzu's Art of War, win with surprise. The three forces in my magical item are based on this principle. I'll use my main yin qi to hold back your main force, and then I'll use my yang qi to harass you in all directions, making you distracted and unable to be distracted. Then, I'll send out a surprise attack, and you won't be able to defend against it. Naturally, you'll be beaten back again and again. Li Yundong's eyes lit up when he heard this. He clapped his hands and exclaimed, "Wonderful. I didn't expect that there would be so much knowledge in fighting." Zi Yuan said with a smile, "Do you think that fighting is about who is stronger, whose spiritual power is stronger, and whose magical powers are more extensive will win? No. If that's the case, you would have been dead when you met Wu Hao and LV Fengping of the Yin Yang sect when you had just reached the Zhuji phase. Their spiritual power and magical powers are much stronger than yours. But you still won. Why do you think so?" Li Yundong was lost in thought. He recalled the scene at that time and didn't speak for a while. Zi Yuan said, "It's because Wu Hao and LV Fengping underestimated the enemy, but at that time, your will was much stronger than theirs, and your ability to adapt to the situation was also much stronger than theirs. Cultivators fight with each other like rabbits and falcons. Often, the outcome can be decided in a few moves. It's impossible to fight for hundreds of rounds like on TV. Therefore, fighting is like using a weapon. If you don't have an absolute chance of winning, then you must find a way to use a weak weapon to be arrogant, a strong weapon to resist, and a surprise attack to win." Hearing this, Li Yundong sighed and said, "I understand. Today, I know why Su Chan said that you are the #1 expert of the younger generation in the cultivation world. Fortunately, when I had just reached the Zhuji phase, the enemy I met was not you. Otherwise, I would have died without a burial place." Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "Don't belittle yourself. Your talent is rare in the world, and your luck is even more rare. In less than half a year, you have cultivated to the realm of Shentong. This kind of progress is simply shocking. If you continue to cultivate like this for a few more years, I'm afraid that I won't be your opponent." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Well, it's not good for the two of us to flatter each other. By the way, I want to ask if I can add another attribute to my fan of 7 treasures. I'm always afraid that this magical item will be taken away." Zi Yuan nodded and said with a smile, "Yes." Li Yundong's eyes lit up. "Yes? What can I do?" Chapter 240. Go to watch net. Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong and said, "The method is very simple. Just refine another magical item with other attributes into the fan of 7 treasures. Go to watch net." 7 KOM. Li Yundong asked, "How do I refine it?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "You can slowly figure it out after you pass the heavenly tribulation. But what I want to tell you is that when you fight with others, unless it's a last resort, or if your strength is not absolutely overwhelming, don't try to snatch the other party's magical item. A battle of magical powers is usually a battle between people and celestial instruments. It's a battle between horses and celestial instruments. It's a battle between horses and celestial instruments. It's a battle between horses and celestial instruments. It's a battle between humans and celestial instruments. It's a battle between horses and celestial instruments. It's a battle between humans and celestial instruments. It's a battle between horses and celestial instruments. It's a battle between humans and celestial instruments. It's a battle between horses and celestial instruments. It's a battle between humans and celestial instruments." Li Yundong felt enlightened after hearing this. He said, "I understand. Snatching the other party's magical item is a bit like close combat. It's dangerous and unpredictable. You can defeat your opponent quickly, and your opponent can also defeat you quickly. Victory or defeat is only in an instant. In fighting, close combat was the most dangerous, because once you got close to the other party, all the vital parts of the other party would be within your attack range, but at the same time, all the vital parts of the other party would also be within the attack range of the other party. At this time, it was a competition of people's reaction, experience, instinct, and luck. The same was true of fighting. Once it was close combat, the factors that determined the outcome of the battle would become secondary, because if a person was hit in the vital parts with 100 kilograms of strength, he would die. If a person was hit in the vital parts with 10 kilograms of strength, he would also die. The same was true of Jinqi and magical power. Zi Yuan nodded and said, "That's right. If you encounter a master who is much stronger than you, and if the other party forcibly tries to snatch your magical item, and the attribute power hidden in your magical item is far beyond his expectations and holds up his Jinqi, then you can take the opportunity to give him a blow. You can also turn defeat into victory." Li Yundong let out a long sigh and said, "Listening to your words is better than fighting for 10 years. Zi Yuan couldn't help but purse her lips and smile. "What kind of nonsense is that?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Looks like I didn't come here for nothing today." Zi Yuan's eyes flickered, and her heart skipped a beat. She said, "Next time, you should say hello before you come back. Don't appear behind me silently. Watch net." Li Yundong smiled and said, "How could I be silent? You were so engrossed that you didn't even notice me when I walked up to you." Zi Yuan couldn't help blushing slightly. She said angrily, "Anyway, just knock on the door in the future." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Okay, I'll definitely knock next time." As he spoke, he walked out of Zi Yuan's bedroom and went to the balcony. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly thought of something and asked, "By the way, why does your magical item have metal properties, but Wan Hongling's magical item doesn't? If her magic tool also had this attribute, I'm afraid I would have died long ago." Zi Yuan sighed slightly. "Hongling is my master's disciple in name, but she has hardly been taught by him for more than a few days. Master only passed on a magical item to her, and then she ascended to become an immortal. There was no time to add other attributes to her magical item." Li Yundong suddenly asked, "Is your master's name Wang Yuanshan?" Zi Yuan's eyes were deep in thought. She replied casually, "Yes." But she soon came to her senses and glared at Li Yundong with shame and anger. "Did you see everything just now?" Seeing that the situation was not good, Li Yundong laughed dryly and flew back to his balcony, shouting, "I didn't do it on purpose. I just saw your master's name." Zi Yuan was embarrassed and angry on the balcony. Her cheeks were as red as the rosy clouds in the evening, but Li Yundong's words at least made her feel a little relieved. Fortunately, he had only seen her master's name. But before long, she suddenly realized something. What did he mean by, "only saw your master's name"? This meant that he had seen something else. Otherwise, why did he add the word, "yes"? So he saw the psalm that master left for me? He saw me write his name? I wrote his name with no other meaning. It's just. Zi Yuan was flustered, and her mind was in a mess. For a moment, she stood on the balcony in a daze, her heart in a mess, and she couldn't help but fall into a daze. Go to CNET. 7 KOM. When Li Yundong returned to his home, he thought about the psalm he had seen for a while and couldn't help but wonder, what does this poem mean? He thought for a while, but he couldn't figure it out, so he stopped thinking about it and took out the fan of 7 treasures from his cloth bag. Then, he took out the 5 yang blood pearl and LV Fengping's whip, which he had hidden at home from Wu Hao. Li Yundong sat cross-legged in the living room and looked at the 3 magical items in front of him. He muttered to himself, "Well, the main magical item I have now is the fan of 7 treasures. Its attribute is yang, so how about I add some yin qi to it? But the question is, how do I add it?" Li Yundong closed his eyes and began to circulate his qi. He could feel the powerful primordial yang qi surging in his body, but how could this pure primordial yang qi produce the supreme yin qi? If a master of external boxing couldn't practice softness from hardness, then he would only be a boxer for the rest of his life. He wouldn't be able to become a master, and if he met a top master, he would most likely be defeated. Similarly, if a master of internal boxing couldn't practice hardness from softness, then he would only be a master for the rest of his life. He wouldn't be able to fight, and he wouldn't be able to fight. The same was true of cultivation. Although the explosive power of pure yang qi was strong and powerful, it couldn't last long. Although the power of pure yin qi was long and mighty, it wasn't explosive enough and couldn't defeat the enemy. It had to be a combination of yin and yang and complement each other. Li Yundong looked at the fan of 7 treasures placed from left to right in front of him and thought to himself, this is a magical item of pure yang attribute. His eyes fell on the dark red whip in the middle. Li Yundong reached out and picked it up. He thought to himself, I've got such a magical item, but I haven't taken a good look at it yet. I don't know what kind of magical item it is. He slightly qi and tested it, but he felt an extremely soft yin power coming from it. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. Is this a magical item of yin attribute? He tried to probe it again, but suddenly felt a tough and strange power coming from it. This power was relatively similar to the yin qi in it, but it was also different. The two forces supported and nourished each other, which surprised Li Yundong very much. Li Yundong couldn't figure out the source of this power, so he put down the whip for a moment and didn't probe it again, lest the magical item backfire because he didn't know the enemy's situation. Li Yundong's eyes moved to the 5 yang blood beads, and he couldn't help frowning for a moment. He suddenly thought of the countless ghosts released by the 5 yang blood beads when he was fighting with Wu Hao. Especially when the 5 yang blood beads hit Wu Hao, the flames had burned Wu Hao to ashes, and the ghosts had devoured his soul completely. Thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help but shiver. He picked up the 2 5 yang blood beads and couldn't help looking them up and down. He was secretly shocked. The 5 yang blood beads were black, as if they were the color of blood. The beads were about the size of a thumb, and their surface was smooth. Li Yundong could faintly see a dark red airflow surging through the surface. Li Yundong's slightly qi went in and immediately felt an extremely cold aura suddenly counterattack. It was fierce and sharp, and the aura was bone-chilling. Li Yundong frowned slightly, and the yuanyang qi in his body suddenly burst out, like a hot torrent to meet the cold qi. As soon as the 2 auras collided, the 5 yang blood beads suddenly jumped out of his palm and trembled violently in the air, as if they would explode in the next second. Li Yundong was shocked. Oh no, if it explodes here, it doesn't matter if I'm injured or not, the house will be destroyed. Li Yundong stood up and stretched out his hand to grab the 5 yang blood bead. As soon as he grabbed it, the 5 yang blood bead suddenly flashed with a dark red light, illuminating the room. Then, with a buzzing sound, the 5 yang blood bead suddenly exploded. At this moment, Li Yundong saw a dark red flame constantly rolling and growing in front of him. Countless black ghosts howled from the flame and pounced on him with ferocious faces. Without thinking, Li Yundong immediately made Vajra fists with both hands. His left index finger was straight, and he used the little finger of his right hand to hold the first joint of his left index finger. The tip of his left index finger was supported by the first joint of his right thumb, and he made a mantra Mahamudra. In the blink of an eye, Li Yundong's qi sank into his dantian, and his voice was like spring thunder. He shouted, "Bang!" This was Bodhi's first wisdom seal, the Vajra fist seal of the great sun Dharma realm, which could destroy all darkness. Li Yundong's Mahavarokana palm print was thrown out. In the blink of an eye, a golden palm print flew straight out from the balcony into the sky, leaving a long golden light behind. It didn't dissipate until it was very far away. Countless ghosts and fierce souls were slapped by the Mahavarokana handprint. Those who were hit directly disappeared without a sound, and some of them, even if they were brushed by it, suddenly had smoke rising from their bodies. They wailed and fled in all directions, not daring to take another step toward Li Yunyang. However, it was easy to extinguish ghosts, but difficult to put out a fire. Li Yundong saw a ball of fire burning out of thin air in front of him. This ball of fire twisted violently, and it kept compressing to the middle. Then, it suddenly exploded, and sparks flew in all directions in the room. Li Yunyang subconsciously lifted the fan of 7 treasures with the tip of his foot. He grabbed the bone of the fan with one hand and waved his other hand fiercely. With a swoosh, the fan of 7 treasures suddenly opened, and the fan leaves clanged like flywheels. The fan of 7 treasures spun in the living room, and immediately, like a huge whirlpool, it forcibly sucked all the flames around it into its body. For a moment, the fan of 7 treasures also burned fiercely. Just as Li Yundong was about to extinguish the dark red flame, he suddenly saw the other 5 young blood pearl tremble violently with a buzzing sound. Then, it suddenly jumped into the air, trembled for a while, and exploded with a bang. Chapter 241. Go to watch net. The moment Li Yundong saw the second 5 young blood pearl fly up, all the hair on his body stood on end. All the 36,000 pores on his body suddenly opened, and the jinqi in his body suddenly surged out. This was all the potential that a person could burst out at the moment of life and death. Li Yundong's jinqi poured out like a flood, like a huge wave rushing toward the 5 young blood pearl that was about to explode. Go to watch net. The moment the jinqi wrapped around the 5 young blood bead, the 5 young blood bead suddenly exploded with a bang. The explosive force shook Li Yundong's body, and the jinqi he had released was almost instantly scattered. The rolling dark red flame continued to spread, and in the blink of an eye, it rushed toward Li Yundong. At this time, all the jinqi in Li Yunyang's body was pouring out. It could be said that he had no power to defend himself at all. He couldn't even pick up the fan of 7 treasures. He could only watch the flames and the ghosts rushing at him fiercely. A thought suddenly flashed through his mind: it's over. But with a thought, the fan of 7 treasures in his hand suddenly jumped up and flew out of his hand. As it jumped into the air, all the leaves of the fan opened up. Every leaf made a clanging sound and quickly jumped out of the fan, forming a row in the air. It was like a steel wall that had appeared out of nowhere. The roaring flame suddenly hit the iron wall of the fan of 7 treasures, and its momentum was immediately blocked. Li Yundong, who was behind the fan, only felt a scorching heat blowing in his face, and the ends of his hair were curled up by the roasting heat. Li Yundong saw that the flame was blocked by the fan of 7 treasures and quickly spread around. Seeing that the room was about to become a sea of fire, he subconsciously thought, "Oh no, this house is going to be destroyed." As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, the iron wall in front of him suddenly made a clanging sound and quickly pulled open into a circular iron wall, firmly wrapping the flame in it. Although the number of the fan leaves was limited and there was inevitably a gap in the middle, the high-speed rotation of the fan made up for this. Moreover, as the fan leaf rotated at high speed, the golden Sanskrit on the fan leaf also floated out, forming a thick and dense layer of golden pagoda inside and outside. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. At first glance, Li Yundong could only feel the golden light and awe-inspiring divine power. He was shocked and couldn't help thinking, could it be that the fan of 7 treasures knows what I'm thinking? Ah, right, the so-called fan of 7 treasures is naturally psychic. Not only can it protect its master, but it can also know its master's thoughts. Thinking of this, Li Yundong began to consciously control the treasured fan. He thought to himself, can I refine the flames and ghosts of the 5 young blood pearl? Sure enough, the rapidly rotating blades of the psychic fan of 7 treasures suddenly stopped, and the golden Sanskrit characters floating in the air around the blades also stopped in the air, as if they were sculptures. After a while, the ribs of the psychic fan of 7 treasures suddenly jumped into the middle of the flames, like a Buddha who was about to sacrifice himself to feed the eagles. It stood in the middle of the flames, receiving the burning of the flames and the biting of the ghosts, motionless. Li Yundong's eyes widened. He saw that some of these fan of 7 treasures were sitting cross-legged and chanting sutras, some were glaring, some were subduing demons, and some were putting their hands together. Their postures were all different. With the sound of the fan leaf spinning, Li Yundong could even faintly hear the solemn chanting of sutras coming from the flames. Li Yundong's eyes widened. He saw that some of these arhats and vajras were sitting cross-legged and chanting sutras, some were glaring at vajras, some were subduing demons, and some were putting their palms together. Their postures were all different. With the sound of the fan leaf spinning, Li Yundong could even faintly hear the solemn chanting of sutras coming from the flames. The chanting seemed to come from an extremely distant place. It was empty and distant. Li Yundong couldn't hear what was being chanted, but he could feel that there was an extremely powerful force in the sutra. The moment the sound of the scripture rang out, the vengeful ghosts in the flames suddenly began to wail miserably. The dark red flames also became alternating between green and blue, twisting and rolling. One after another, the ferocious faces of the vengeful ghosts rolled about in the flames. They looked terrifying, and the situation was like purgatory. After a while, the high-speed rotating fan leaf began to slowly close, compressing the flames and ghosts in the middle bit by bit. Gradually, they were compressed into a ball. When there was only the size of a fist left, the shining golden Vajra arhats suddenly moved. Their bodies all gathered above the ribs of the psychic fan of 7 treasures, forming a life-sized Vajra. There was a 7-colored halo behind this Vajra, and behind the halo were 5-colored feathers that resembled the feathers of a peacock, bright and dazzling. He had 3 heads and 6 arms, and his upper body was bare. The muscles on his body were bulging, and he was filled with a mighty sense of power. He wore a golden arhat kasaya, and his feet were bare as he stepped on a 7-colored auspicious cloud. As soon as Li Yundong saw this Vajra, his body shook violently. He suddenly thought of the 3-headed and 6-armed god he had visualized. He thought to himself, could it be that this 3-headed and 6-armed Vajra has some connection with the Vajra I visualized? Or is it just a coincidence? As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, he heard Vajra shout loudly and recite scriptures. His voice was loud and clear, but he was speaking in a foreign language. Li Yundong couldn't understand a word at all. He smiled bitterly and thought to himself, F***ck, no wonder they say that foreign monks can recite scriptures. They're all reciting scriptures in a foreign language. What did he say? After Vajra finished reciting the scriptures, a figure suddenly flashed on the balcony of Li Yundong's house. It was Zi Yuan who had heard the sound and was standing on the balcony. When she saw the 3-headed and 6-armed Vajra, she was suddenly shocked and cried out involuntarily, Akalanatha. As soon as she finished speaking, she saw the Akalanatha suddenly glare at her angrily. With this glare, Zi Yuan felt as if she had been hit by a hammer in the air. Her whole body trembled, her heart was pounding, and her Taoist heart was in chaos. Zi Yuan was shocked in her heart. So powerful. Is this the deity of the fan of 7 treasures? While she was in shock, she saw the 3-headed and 6-armed Akalanatha disappear in an instant. The fan leaves around the last flame suddenly closed, squeezing all the flames in it and forcibly extinguishing them. The spirit of Compass, who had been squeezed into a ball in the flame, was also squeezed into a cloud of smoke in an instant. Go to see the net. Then the fan leaves separated with a click, and all the fan leaves flew back into the fan bones of the fan of 7 treasures. The sound was sonorous, like a sword being sheathed. After the fan of 7 treasures returned to normal, it folded the fan leaves in the air with a clang and fell to the ground with a bang. However, it did not fall down, like a stone monument. Li Yundong walked closer and saw that the fan bones of the fan of 7 treasures were faintly surrounded by a layer of black mist. In the mist, there was a distorted and terrifying face of a resentful ghost. What's going on? Li Yundong was taken aback and couldn't help asking. Zi Yuan also came over and looked at it carefully. She suddenly raised her head and said in surprise, You refined the 5-yang blood bead into the fan of 7 treasures? Li Yundong said blankly, I don't know, but it seems to be so. Zi Yuan took a deep breath and looked at Li Yundong with a strange expression. Do you know how lucky you are? Li Yundong smiled dryly and said, "It seems that my luck has always been good." Zi Yuan shook her head and said in disbelief, "You've only been practicing Shintong for a few days, yet you dared to refine a powerful magical weapon into another powerful magical weapon. You're really bold." If it weren't for the fact that the fan of 7 treasures automatically protected its owner, and its Vajra Yang Qi just happened to restrain the ghostly Yin Qi of the 5 Yang blood bead, not only would this powerful magical weapon have been destroyed, but you would also have been finished. Li Yundong looked aggrieved. "Didn't you ask me to refine it?" Zi Yuan said angrily, "I asked you to refine it later, not now." Li Yundong smiled awkwardly and said, "I misunderstood." Seeing that Zi Yuan was angry, he quickly changed the topic and asked, "What did the Akalanatha say just now? What language was he speaking?" Zi Yuan glanced at Li Yundong, as if she was helpless about this shameless guy. She sighed slightly and said, "He was speaking Sanskrit." Li Yundong asked, "What did he say? Why did the ghostly aura run to the psychic fan of 7 treasures after he finished speaking?" Zi Yuan said, "He said, 'Those who see my body will have a Bodhi heart, those who hear my name will cut off evil and cultivate good, those who hear my Dharma will have great wisdom, and those who know my heart will become Buddha.'" Li Yundong thought of the Buddhist classics he had read and suddenly understood. "I see, this is the vow of the Akalanatha." Zi Yuan nodded and said, "It's also the incantation of the Akalanatha to subdue demons. By chance, you have refined the ghost chi of the 5 Yang blood pearl into the fan of 7 treasures. It can be said that you are an anomaly among anomalies. Others would never have thought that your fan of 7 treasures, which is full of Yang Qi and majestic and solemn, actually has such evil and vicious spiritual power. If the other party comes to steal your magical item, they will definitely suffer a great loss." Li Yundong laughed and said, "This is called good people will be rewarded, and good people will be blessed." Seeing his frivolous and arrogant smile, Zi Yuan couldn't help but say with a smile, "I think you are a villain who has achieved success." Li Yundong grinned and winked at Zi Yuan. "Are you jealous of me?" Zi Yuan spat and said, "You are the fastest cultivator in the world, and you are also the most thick-skinned one." Li Yundong cupped his hands shamelessly and said with a smile, "Thank you for the compliment." Zi Yuan shook her head with a smile and said, "I won't talk to you anymore. I just heard that something was wrong here, so I flew over to have a look. Before you reach the Yuanine phase, don't easily refine a magical item. Otherwise, the consequences will be unpredictable. This kind of thing can't happen again, but it can't happen a third time. You must remember this." She told him a few words and then flew back to her home. Li Yundong recalled what had happened before at home, calculating the gains and losses in his heart. Thinking of the danger, he suddenly thought, if it weren't for the fan of 7 treasures in my hand, wouldn't I have been dead just now? Li Yundong calmed down. Thinking of this, he felt cold sweat all over his body, and he felt a burst of fear in his heart. With a look of fear on his face, he took a few deep breaths and adjusted his qi. Only then did the fear in his heart slowly dissipate. Li Yundong looked around the living room and couldn't help smiling bitterly. Cultivation is really a very expensive thing. Just this burnt sofa alone costs thousands of yuan. I'm going to lose money again. I have to find a way to make money as soon as possible. But how do I get started? You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.